Hi everyone, this is What If Fan, bringing you another part of What If Harry Became an Artificer. Please find fanfic name and author name in the description and please support the author. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Let's start chapter. Scholars, commission, trickery, taunt. What's this? Harry asked as Fleur smiled. The Vila girl handed him a small stack of parchment and Harry read the top line. Magic measurement, mana in relation to spell effects and power. Harry blinked at what was clearly a title before reading a bit further. Oh, I see, so they want to further understand and quantify mana and how it applies to using magic. The parchments Fleur had handed Harry were the magical equivalent of a research paper. Apparently, several magical scholars had taken his measuring method and used it to further break down and understand spells. It is so very interesting, Harry, Fleur smiled at her friend. Madame Aveline is part of the research group. She makes copies of her notes for me to look over. They've broken down your mana measurement into 2 factors. Harry smiled at seeing Fleur so excited. The silver blonde was very intelligent and already on her way to becoming a magical scholar. Being able to read over the notes of one of the biggest changes to the magical community in regards to magic would obviously make her happy. Harry looked over the parchment again and noted the names of the 2 factors of mana usage, the lum and the thaum. Lum was each individual unit of mana, or a 1 if measured by a scouter or test frame. A thaum was the unit of change per lum. They'd apparently started their research with the Lumos charm just as he'd done. It was certainly interesting. By the notes he was looking at, if a standard Lumos charm produced around 5 lux of illumination, or light per square meter per lum, then the thaum, or how much changed with each lum, would be measured as 5. This was for just the basic Lumos charm too. A more complex spell, such as Protego or a Stupefy, would certainly have much more differences in their power and duration of effect as they were measured. What are they testing now, Fleur? Harry asked as he looked over the parchments. Madame Aveline says they're testing the summoning charm at the moment. Fleur answered with a bright smile. Lum produces about a meter of movement per second, so the thaum is 1 as well. More lums increases both the distance and speed at a ratio of 2v to 1d. This is even before you factor in the object in question's weight too. Fleur was excitedly chatting about the research and Harry was just able to keep up with the girl. He was glad that further research into magic and spells was being done because of his measurement system. The magical scholars of the world would be the ones that tested and made sense of his measurement system in relation to magic. From the parchments in his hands, and Fleur's excited talk about the results so far, well, he was fairly certain his measurement system would be integrated into the understanding of magic from now on. It might even become a staple of arithmancy in relation to spellcraft. Hence his brilliant Fleur. Harry smiled at his platinum-haired friend. I'm glad to see that more is being understood and tested in regards to magic. This could make understanding spellcraft easier for people. I might just try my hand at a few original spells, since some people don't seem to want to share theirs. He threw out towards Tonks and Penny. Both young ladies replied in their own way to Harry's comment. Penny simply smiled and returned to the book she was reading. Tonks, maturely, stuck out her tongue and blew a raspberry at him. Nuh-uh, mister. Cube is my spell. I worked hard on it. Tonks stuck her nose into the air in an act of faux pompousness. If you want to learn it, you'll have to have an original spell of your own to trade. The metamorph teased from where she was sitting on the couch flipping through Witch Weekly. Just you wait, Nim. I'll create a spell so amazing you'll be begging to learn it, Harry promised as he pointed at the currently green-haired woman. Promises, Harrikins, Tonks chuckled as she flipped a page in her magazine. The group was currently hanging out at Wood End Cottage. The summer break was almost over and Harry was taking a break from his enchanting and spell practice. It was Tonks' day off and they'd all been able to get together for a bit. With Fleur addresses shared during their visit to France, it wasn't odd to find Fleur at Wood End Cottage a few times a week. Likewise, it wasn't odd for Harry and Sirius to pop over to the Delacour Chateau for a weekend on invitation. Fleur, Penny and Tonks had most certainly hit it off and become rather good friends. Fleur and Penny were both academics and could nerd talk, as Tonks called it, for hours. Though Fleur enjoyed a good duel almost as much as Tonks, and the metamorph relished having a partner to practice with that wasn't her rough around the edges mentor. Alastair Moody apparently didn't know the meaning of take it easy. Harry and Fleur got along with both academics and dueling. Fleur was very much impressed by his enchanting as well. Harry truly had an affinity for this branch of magic. Fleur was amazed the one time Harry had let her flip through one of his journals with his ideas written into it. The number of ideas was impressive to say the least, but it was the depth of thought noted down on the ideas closer to testing or completion that blew her away. Details about the idea or item, tests and retests, notes about failures or successes. So much existed in the journal and Fleur had only skimmed through it. The Vila girl was very much aware that Tonks and Penny seemed to have made a claim on the young artificer, but she couldn't help becoming more and more interested in him. From their time as pen pals, to meeting each other the first time, to now when they met up and spent time together often, I'm becoming smitten with Harry. Fleur sighed at her thoughts. She'd have to speak with Tonks and Penny privately at some point. Fleur was hopeful her new friends would understand and potentially welcome her even further into their group. For now though, she'd be content to just be near the amazing young man. Her feelings, along with the situation between Harry, Tonks and Penny, could be settled at a later time. Last week of August, Diagon Alley. I've got everything I need, Harry mentioned as he and Sirius finished up their shopping trip. Harry was now ready to return to Hogwarts for his third year. He was hoping his new electives, ancient runes, arithmancy and care of magical creatures, would make the school year more exciting and challenging. He was starting to get bored with the slow pace of the Hogwarts curriculum. Are you sure you want to do this? Sirius questioned his godson with concern. That money belongs to me and they're basically holding it hostage. I'm getting it back, Harry replied with a determined gaze. I just need you to come with me, Sirius, so that they take me seriously. Alright, Harry, I get it. Sirius sighed before smiling at his godson. Don't tell Marley. She'd be giving me hell about messing with the goblins. Just think of tea as one of your pranks that you enjoy so much, Harry mentioned as the duo made their way towards Gringotts. The most dangerous prank I've ever been a part of. Sirius cracked a grin. The two walked up the steps of Gringotts and joined a line for the tellers. A few minutes later they stepped up, and Harry requested to speak to his account overseer. Follow me. A goblin waved them over and then started walking without waiting for them. The two wizards caught up with the goblin and were led to the same door Harry had stood in front of before his first year at Hogwarts. The door with a gold plaque that simply said Margok hadn't changed at all. The goblin leading them knocked 3 times and a call of enter was heard from within. Without waiting for a word, the goblin left Sirius and Harry standing at the door. They entered and sat in the 2 plain chairs before the goblin's desk. Back again, Mr. Potter? Margok questioned the teen in front of him. I see you've brought your legal guardian this time. Regardless, you still cannot access the Potter family vault. You have things that belong to me in your possession. Harry began and noticed the goblin looking vaguely amused. But I have something that I believe your people want far more than the contents of the Potter family vault and my trust vault. I highly doubt that, Mr. Potter. Margok snorted dismissively. So you don't want this back? Harry asked as he unwrapped his invisibility cloak from around the sword of Gryffindor. Margok's eyes locked onto the legendary blade and the goblin was suddenly sitting straight up. That's a fake, Margok accused, baring his fangs. No, I found it at Hogwarts last year. Test it if you want. Harry placed the sword on top of the desk, but he didn't let go of the handle, not even when Margok glared harshly at him for the implied threat of holding a sword within Gringotts. Your choice. Ain't very well, Margok growled as he ran his claws over the blade. Harry briefly noted a bit of magic passing through the sword from his grip on the handle. After several minutes, Margok sat back with a blank expression. Without a word he grabbed a piece of parchment and a quill. The account overseer wrote something down and then folded the parchment. In a blink the parchment was gone from the goblin's desk. You'll wait here and not move, Margok instructed, his face blank. The goblin's eyes were harsh and promised suffering if he was disobeyed. Margok! A deep voice came from behind Harry and Sirius as the door to the office was opened, and a dozen armed goblins entered the room. The voice came from the largest goblin Harry had ever seen. This large goblin stood at least as tall as Drad Erdun, though Harry thought the goblin might actually be a bit taller than the dwarf. Has it truly come into our halls? Ungies King Ragnarok. Margok bowed to the large goblin. Do not move. Ragnarok growled at the wizards as he moved over to the desk and touched the blade with the claw of his index finger. Once again Harry felt magic moving through the blade. This time it was far more mana and it stayed in the blade longer. It even lingered for a brief moment after Ragnarok took his claw off the sword. What is it you want, wizards? So I only want what is mine, Mr. Ragnarok, Harry intoned as he stared into the eyes of the large goblin. The greed and resentment he saw in the goblin's eyes was near sickening. Sin, I am King Ragnarok Gringott, wizard. Do not try to disrespect me in my own halls, Ragnarok growled threateningly as Sirius and Harry noticed the armed goblins reach for their weapons. I could simply take this sword as it is within Gringotts. It is goblin-made and our treaty with your ministry allows us to reclaim what is ours. "Except that it's not," Harry replied evenly. Ragnar and the other goblins tensed up for an instant. "And I know that old story is a load of rubbish. This sword is no more goblin-made than my wand. Taking it would be theft on your part, and it's not like you can make either of us disappear without starting a war. We're a bit high profile, you could say." Sirius spoke pleasantly, though the implied severity of any hostile actions was easily noted. "So you know your history?" Ragnar scoffed at the teen. "What do you want for it?" "As I said earlier, I want what is mine," Harry replied, still holding onto the sword with a tight grip. "How much is in the vaults under the Potter family?" Ragnar questioned Margok while never breaking eye contact with Harry. "Less than 15,000 galleons, plus assorted heirlooms and other such objects, nothing we care about," Margok answered while glaring at Harry. "Stuff it all in a trunk and bring it here," Ragnar ordered, and Margok quickly wrote out a note and made it vanish. "Seems we'll be done here soon, Harry," Sirius remarked to his godson, his eyes not straying from the goblins in the room. "Thankfully," Harry responded as he and Ragnar continued to stare each other down. Several tense minutes later, and two goblins carried in a plain trunk with a scroll of parchment on top. A few words passed in the goblin language and Margok pulled the scroll off the top of the trunk. Handing the scroll to Harry, the account overseer sneered. Harry opened the scroll and went through the list inside. He noted the various amounts of galleons, sickles, and knutes. A bit of math showed him it was right about what the sum total of the Potter family's liquid assets should be. He briefly noted that a list of items most labeled as miscellaneous was included and skimmed it too. He passed the scroll to Sirius to look over. "It has the seal, Harry. They have it all," Sirius remarked, and pointed to an odd mark on the bottom of the scroll. That seal was part of the last treaty with the goblins. When they gained full control over the bank, they had to enter into a magical contract with the ministry. It was to keep both sides honest. If they'd left so much as a knut, or even a scrap of cloth behind that belonged to the Potter family, the seal wouldn't have formed, he explained as he rolled the scroll back up. "Then our deal is done," Harry stated as he let go of the sword of Gryffindor. Ragnar carefully picked up the sword and moved away from the wizards. The sword briefly glowed a dark, putrid green, before Ragnar smiled a fanged grin. "Our deal is done," Ragnar agreed. "Potter, you are never to set foot inside of Gringotts again. If you do so, you'll be treated as an invader and killed. Now take your trunk and get out of my halls." Harry and Sirius stood up and took hold of the trunk before heading towards the door. "Gladly," Harry tossed back over his shoulder as he and Sirius were escorted from the bank. Once they were in Diagon Alley again, they quickly made their way to the apparition point off to the side of Slug and Jigger's apothecary. Sirius side-along apparated Harry and the trunk back to Woodend Cottage. When the duo arrived, they both burst into laughter. "I can't believe you pulled it off, Harry." Sirius laughed loudly as they collapsed onto the grass in the backyard. "You're certain you can get the sword back too?" "That's what the sorting hat told me," Harry chortled as he patted the trunk containing all of the Potter family's wealth and possessions. "I'm just glad to have everything out of the goblins' greedy claws. But let's get this all inside and start going through it." Sirius smiled at his godson as he levitated the trunk inside. Harry agreed happily as he was eager to find out what was in the Potter family vault since he first heard of it. September sent Hogwarts Express. What turned out to be inside the trunk, aside from money, was mostly old clothing and wands of his ancestors. There were also a few trinkets such as fine china and silverware, and even a decent amount of books. Harry was more than happy to spend quite a bit of his last few days of summer looking through it all. But now he was on the Hogwarts Express on his way to his third year. "Harry? You seem to be lost in thought. Are you all right?" Penny asked as she sat across from him. The train was set to depart in just a few more minutes. Harry smiled at Penny before he got a mischievous thought and decided to tease her a little. "I'm fine, Penny. I was just thinking about my birthday," Harry innocently remarked. As expected, Penny's cheeks turned pink and she looked away from him. "You three look nice in those swimsuits." Indeed, Tonks had gotten up to her own brand of mischief for Harry's birthday. The metamorph had gotten Fleur and Penny in on it too, though Penny hadn't known the full extent of Tonks's plan. So it came to be that Harry, poolside at the Delacour Chateau, had gotten to see Tonks, Penny, and Fleur in bikinis. Tonks had grinned before with a snap of her fingers. The bikinis had become much less covering. Those were not swimsuits. Penny practically hid behind her hands in embarrassment. Lingerie covers more than those bikinis did when Tonks was done, considering the fact that said swimwear had suddenly become mostly strings. They barely had enough cloth to cover what needed to be covered, and Harry had gotten quite the eyeful. Oddly enough, Fleur hadn't seemed bothered by it at all. She and Tonks had even posed a bit for the teen with teasing grins and smiles. Penny had shown off her assets by turning around while also trying to cover herself. Harry had politely covered his eyes until Penny calmed down. "I don't think I could have asked for a better gift though," Harry teased lightly. Especially since Penny, Tonks and Fleur were all very lovely young ladies. Fleur would be considered perfect by most men. Pretty face with deep blue eyes, blemish-free skin with a light tan from the summer sun, long flowing platinum blonde hair. Her large breasts that had barely been covered in the slightest by the transfigured bikini, her thin waist and flat stomach, the wide hips and long smooth legs. Vila were known for their physical beauty, and Harry had gotten an up-close view of Fleur in almost all her glory. "Shush you," Penny huffed as she flicked a ball of mana at him. Harry chuckled as it popped against his forehead. All right, I'm sorry." Harry apologized for his teasing. "But you did look very beautiful though, Penny. You're a lovely girl after all. Flattery will get you nowhere, mister." Penny grinned at him softly. "Aw, that's too bad," Harry playfully huffed, and Penny rolled her eyes at him. The two were joined by Luna shortly before the train began to move. Hermione, Padma and Mandy came by to chat for a while during the trip too. All in all, it was a regular train ride to Hogwarts. The only bad part of the trip was when Penny had to leave for almost 2 hours for head girl duties. Penny had been so happy to be made head girl. Harry, Tonks and even Fleur had congratulated the blonde on her achievement. When Penny came back, she sat beside Harry instead of across from him. Luna had smiled at the sight for some reason, but Harry was too happy to have Penny back to care much. They'd spent the last of the train ride leaning against each other happily. "Great Hall sorting ceremony? Hey Penny, where do they keep the sorting hat during the year?" Harry asked as one of the new first years got sorted into Hufflepuff. "In the headmaster's office." "Why?" Penny whispered back curiously. "I needed to keep an agreement I made." Harry whispered to her. "What kind of agreement requires the sorting hat?" Penny questioned quietly. "I just need to return something." Harry looked at her knowingly. "Oh, are you giving it back?" Penny asked curiously. "More like getting it back to its rightful owner," Harry told her before he clapped as a new Ravenclaw started walking towards their table. "And I hope you know what you're doing, Harry," Penny remarked. "Son, I have an idea that could very well hinge on this." Harry smiled back. "If it works out, I'll be able to free up quite a bit of time." September 4th, Saturday, the first weekend of the school term, saw Harry making his way to the headmaster's office. He'd gotten confirmation from Sirius about the part of the plan his godfather was in charge of. He'd also heard back from Drad Erdun, and was pleased as could be that the dwarf, and his father King Erdun, would be meeting him shortly. Sirius had already sent ahead a letter to Dumbledore stating that Harry had a meeting in Hogsmeade. Penny, as head girl, would be escorting Harry to the village to meet with Sirius. Dumbledore had been curious about the meeting but had let the matter rest when Sirius had said it was for Harry's professional enchanting. Interfering in the business of another was punishable in court if the business owner pressed charges. Ice mice. Harry spoke to the gargoyle that guarded the headmaster's office. Why Dumbledore had that set as the password was a mystery to Harry. The gargoyle moved aside and Harry stepped onto the revolving spiral staircase. Once at the office door, Harry was about to knock before he heard Dumbledore. "Come in, Harry," Dumbledore welcomed as the door opened by itself. Harry stepped into the large office and took note of the multitude of odd devices. There were bookshelves filled with heavy tomes, and several cupboards along the walls. Sitting on a perch next to the headmaster's desk was the same phoenix from the chamber. Oh, Harry would very much like to get some more samples of phoenix materials for his research, but for now he'd have to focus and do what he came here for. "Good morning, Headmaster," Harry greeted politely. "Good morning to you as well, Harry," Dumbledore smiled. "So I was a bit confused that you said you needed to meet with me before your business meeting in Hogsmeade with Sirius. If you're hoping to ask for business advice, I'm afraid I don't have much experience," the old man joked. "I actually need to ask your permission to speak with the Sorting Hat, sir," Harry informed Dumbledore of his reason for meeting him. "The Sorting Hat?" Dumbledore questioned curiously. "Why would you need to speak with it? You aren't trying for a resorting, are you?" "Does that a thing?" Harry questioned. He'd never heard of it after all. "Rather rare, Harry. But it has been needed in the past a few times," Dumbledore admitted. "Well, that's not why I'm here." Harry shook his head slightly. "I need to ask the hat for something." "An odd request, Harry," Dumbledore mentioned as he levitated the Sorting Hat off the top of a bookcase and onto his desk. "Thank you, sir." Harry thanked the old man before focusing on the hat. "And I have need of the sword." He spoke clearly and the hat moved a bit. Dumbledore's eyes widened a bit at the term sword. "Where did you leave it?" The Sorting Hat questioned as it faced Harry. "I'm not a post owl, you know. Sen, I apologize, but where it is right now is inaccessible to me," Harry informed the relic in front of him. Fine, just give me a moment." The Sorting Hat brushed off before it straightened up, and a dull thud was heard from within it. Harry reached under the hat and took hold of the handle. Pulling back, the sword of Gryffindor was in his hands once more. "Harry, is that?" Dumbledore almost choked at seeing the legendary sword of Godric Gryffindor in the third year's hands. "Yes, sir, it is the sword of Gryffindor," Harry admitted. "And the Sorting Hat can explain the details to you, but I need this for my meeting." "I don't understand?" Dumbledore looked very confused. Harry stood up and pulled his invisibility cloak out of his inner robe pocket. "The stories you've heard about Godric's sword have been greatly altered, Dumbledore." The Sorting Hat spoke up, and the old man turned his attention to the ancient hat. While the Sorting Hat was telling the headmaster the true history of the blade, Harry wrapped the invisibility cloak around it. The sword vanished from sight, and Harry turned back to Dumbledore. "Thank you, headmaster, but I must be on my way to my meeting. Have a nice Saturday, sir." With that, Harry left through the still open door and down the spiral staircase. "Harry? Harry, wait!" Dumbledore stood up from his desk. "Don't!" The Sorting Hat spoke loudly, stopping Dumbledore from taking a step. "The sword does not belong to you, to Hogwarts, or even to Mr. Potter. Now that Gryffindor's line is gone, that sword belongs to the line that forged it. No one has any right to stop Mr. Potter from returning it. It's a relic of Hogwarts, one of the lost items of the Founders," Dumbledore stated, and the Sorting Hat did its own equivalent of a headshake. "And is no longer the sword of Gryffindor. That family line is gone from this world. It is the sword of Erden now, just as it should be. Do not make the mistake of thinking you have the right to dictate where that sword goes," the Sorting Hat stated with a tone of finality. "I would not wish to become a thief," Dumbledore sighed as he sat down again. "But how did the story come to be twisted so much? That happened long ago, shortly after I took possession of the sword." The Sorting Hat began to tell the tale from the information that it knew. It would be a lengthy tale if the hat told everything of its nearly 1,000 years of existence. For the sake of saving time, though, the hat would only tell the headmaster what related directly to the sword. Harry met Penny in the Great Hall, and the two of them were quickly on their way towards Hogsmeade. The village came into view after a short ride on one of the carriages. Sirius was waiting for them at the Three Broomsticks as planned. "Your associates are already in the private room, Harry," Sirius said in an imitation of a personal secretary. "Ha ha, Sirius," Harry deadpanned. "This is important, so behave, if I must," Sirius chuckled, and Penny stifled her giggles at the antics between Godfather and Godson. The trio made their way into the private room of the Three Broomsticks. Waiting for them was Drad Erden and his father, King Draserd Erden. "A pleasure to see you again, Erden." Harry greeted the dwarf he knew. He got a nod back from the dwarf in response. "It is good to meet you, King Erden." "Not much of a king without a mountain lad," Draserd replied with a tired look on his older face. "Why have you asked to meet with me? Your letter was rather vague." "Sen, I have something that belongs to you, King Erden, and I believe it is more than time that it was returned to you," Harry answered as he unwrapped the invisibility cloak from the sword. Both dwarves jolted when the sword was revealed, and Harry presented it to them. "Lad, no, Harry Potter. Where did you find this?" Draserd asked as he slowly stepped towards the blade. "Inside the Sorting Hat, if you can believe it," Harry replied. "Was defending the school last year, almost died to a basilisk. The Sorting Hat arrives with a phoenix and gives me the sword. It's a long story, honestly. And a sword my father forged," Draserd murmured quietly as he looked the blade over. "It's been so long. Careful with the blade, King Erden. I might have accidentally given it a basilisk venom upgrade by accident," Harry informed the elder dwarf. "How the hell do you give it a power like that accidentally?" Drad questioned, and Harry turned to look at the confused younger dwarf. "Shoved it through a basilisk's head and it got coated in the venom," Harry explained sheepishly. The teen artificer was pretty sure he felt Penny's eyes staring into the back of his head. "But I return this to you, as it should have been long ago. Thank you, Harry Potter." Draserd spoke as he picked the sword up and held it before his eyes. "The line of Erden has hope once more." The sword suddenly glowed, and the inscription on the guard that read Gryffindor changed until it spelled out Erden. The rubies in the guard almost seemed to have fire in them, as the sword's innate magic synced with Draserd's magic. The claiming was a sight to behold, and when the magic died down, the sword almost looked brand new. It gleamed with a light that had never been present in all the time Harry had it in his possession. Haven't seen a smile like that on your face in ages, father. Drad smiled at his father. Indeed, Dressard had a smile on his bearded face. To Harry it looked like the weight of years had suddenly left the Dwarf King. The elder dwarf switched the sword of Erdun to his left hand, and extended his right hand out to Harry. Harry returned the gesture, expecting a handshake, only to find his forearm grasped. Realizing what Dressard was going for, Harry clasped his hand around the dwarf's much thicker forearm. From this day forth, Harry Potter is a brother to the dwarves of Erdun. If ever you need our aid, you have but to call on us, Dressard intoned, and Harry felt a shift in his magic. On his forearm a small symbol had appeared. Harry surmised this was a magical rite of some kind. The mark was probably the emblem of the Erdun line of dwarves. I'm honored, King Erdun, Harry replied, and the two released each other's arms. Welcome, Brother Potter. Drad grinned at the teen and Harry grinned back. Pleased to be a part of Erdun, Harry responded. Is there anything you need us for at the moment, Harry? Dressard questioned the Artificer. Actually, I had a business proposition for the dwarves of Erdun, Harry informed them. Seeing both dwarves were interested, Harry continued. I recently got my first professional commission. The DMLE wants to make one of my items standard issue to their aurors. They've put in an order for 500 of them, and I simply can't fulfill that by myself. We would need a place to work, if what you need done is blacksmithing and rune work, Dressard replied, and Sirius stepped forward. Already taken care of, King Erdun. Sirius gave a small bow. Ain't I purchased a large building in Diurn Alley that can be used for blacksmithing and as a workshop. It even has a storefront for direct sales to walk-in customers. In your favor, Harry. I'll not hear another word. Dressard had a light in his eyes that showed a surging of emotion. Harry was fairly sure that emotion was hope, a newly rekindled hope for the future of his people. All right, but we'll renegotiate for an even split in 10 years. Harry agreed. He wanted the dwarves to have the appropriate compensation for their time and skills after all. Very well. Dressard chuckled along with Drad. I'll show you the plans for the items I'd like you all to make. You can also make your own items and sell them in the storefront. All the profits of those sales are yours to do with as you please, Harry told his new business partners. And I'll sign the secrecy contract and bind my people to it in regards to your creations, Harry. Dressard promised the young wizard that had already done so much for his people. From there, Harry, Sirius, and Dressard had spent the next 2 hours going over the secrecy contract that Sirius had drawn up by a legal professional. Sirius had also spent the equivalent of 9% of the Black family fortune to buy an iron mine. The land the mine sat on had belonged to another magical family that had long abandoned the site. The wizards and witches of that family had fallen on hard times since the war against Grindelwald. Now they were more than happy to restore their wealth by selling a piece of land they didn't even use. Dressard had barely kept his emotions in check when Sirius had said that the dwarves could work there to mine iron ore and any other metals they found. The Dwarf King felt real hope for the returned prosperity of his people. For the first time since they'd been driven to the edge of the magical world, the dwarves had a real chance. Mining, smithing, and crafting. These were the true callings of the dwarves. His people could finally have their respect and dignity. Needless to say, all parties involved had happily signed the contract. That night, the dwarves had celebrated for the first time in far too long. They had a real chance to secure their future now. They had their ancestral sword back. They had steady, respectable work for good wages. The only thing they were still missing from before they'd been all but exiled was a mountain hall. For some reason, Dressard was fairly certain that the dwarves would even get that back with their continued brotherhood with Harry Potter. Current mana levels: Harry, Tonks, Penelope, Fleur, Chapter, Gift, Items, Progress. September was nearing its end and Harry was happy. With the dwarves taking care of the Ministry Commission of Oro Batons, Harry had much more free time to work on his other ideas. Test frames were also being made and sold in the storefront in Diurn Alley. Harry had taken out an ad in the Daily Prophet. This was to bring attention to the new store. Potter and Erdun Creations, as the store was called, had a fairly large advert on the second page of the last 3 copies of the Daily Prophet. Test frames could now be purchased just by going to the store and buying one. This freed up a lot of Harry's time, and the teen artificer was more than happy to work on his artifact sword or some of his other ideas. So if I etch each link with the same array, I should get the same effect even if a link or multiple links are broken, Harry murmured to himself as he looked over the chain he was working on. With the dwarves' help, Harry had gotten a decent amount of magical iron to work and experiment with. He'd had an idea to alter his mana-severing runic array and cross it with the Aurora Baton's temporary mana drain array. If his idea panned out, and all the sequences he'd written out so far had no reason not to, then he'd have a new item that could be used for both restraint and possibly defense. As long as the control sequence works properly, of course. Harry mused as he once again looked over his notes and various runic sequences. When he was done, he'd have an item that could render a wizard or witch, and potentially anything that used magic to cause an external effect, powerless. This would be an item he'd be keeping exclusively to himself, for obvious reasons. With that, Harry took out his etching tool and set to work on the short length of chain that would be his first test of his new mana bane. Array. Albania, Master, your loyal servant has come. A huddled wizard trembled as he kneeled before a shabby-looking man. The man's eyes were red and his face gaunt. He moved with slightly jerky motions and a strange smell came from him constantly. "Stop that whimpering, Flint," the shabby man hissed out. "And I already know why you finally sought me out. The main line of the Flint family has cast out its lesser members to save what little gold they have left. They go about their lives while I languish in this state. They will know my displeasure once I am restored to my former glory." Yes, my lord." Stephen Flint, a member of one of the pureblood Flint family's branches, stuttered out. Even weakened and possessing someone his master, Lord Voldemort, was terrifying. "Find me another squib, Flint," Voldemort hissed out as the body he was currently inhabiting spasmed strongly. "This one won't last much longer." "Yes, my lord." Stephen bowed and quickly apparated to the nearest magical village. "Barely useful for anything." Voldemort hissed out his frustration. He was furious at being reduced to this state. His time possessing and draining the magic from Quirrell had strengthened him greatly from the mere smoke and vapor he'd been. When Dumbledore, Voldemort sneered at the mere thought of his old professor, had trapped and ambushed him in that chamber at the end of his blasted trap-filled corridor. He'd managed to escape by tossing the near-dead body of Quirrell at the old man. But now Dumbledore was aware of just how much he'd recovered. That would let the old fool plan for his eventual return. For now, Voldemort had bigger concerns. He was strong enough to possess and drain the magic from squibs by force, but each subsequent host lasted less and less time. This meant that he was gaining strength, which was good, but also that he'd need a much more permanent solution to his lack of a physical body. "Time, I just need more time," the weakened Dark Lord muttered under his breath as he waited for his servant to return with his next host. "Hogwarts, second week of October, no way." Harry breathed out as he looked at the package that had been sent to him from the dwarves. Inside was a piece of metal, created and refined by the dwarves as a thank you gift to him for improving their quality of life. According to the letter, written to him by King Erdan, this was a material that only the dwarves knew how to make. "Harry, would you like to share what's so special about this package?" Penny asked him. They were currently in the hidden workshop at Hogwarts. Harry had received the large package at breakfast not 10 minutes ago. Thankfully today was Saturday, so they had no classes. Penny was honestly a mix of confused, concerned, and slightly mirthful. Harry had opened the package and simply stared at it, mumbling "no way" every moment or two after having read the letter that accompanied the package. "Huh?" Harry shook his head before focusing on Penny. "What's so special about this package?" Penny asked again with a grin. "You won't believe this." Harry broke out into a wide smile. "This is a thank you gift from the dwarves. It's Isamun, also called everlasting iron by wizards and witches. It has similar properties to adamantite, but with one key difference: Isamun is unchangeable by magic. It can't be transfigured, charmed, or altered through alchemy. Only the dwarves know how to make it." The teen artificer gushed as he picked up the bar of Isamun and started looking it over. "If you can't change it, then isn't it kind of useless to your enchanting?" Penny questioned. It seemed like a rare paperweight to her the way Harry described it as unchangeable. "Not at all," Harry laughed as he placed the metal bar back down on his work table. "I can still etch runes onto the Isamun and use it as a focal point for whatever creation I add it to. That'll impart a similar strength and durability to the item it becomes. Whatever I make with it will be just as unaffected by magic as the Isamun is." "Oh, that could definitely be useful then," Penny remarked, now understanding the properties of the metal better, but very useful in fact. Harry suddenly trailed off as his eyes widened. "In fact, it could be just what I was missing." The artificer quickly opened a drawer on the desk and pulled out his journal with all his notes about his artifact sword. "If I use the right runes, a proper sequence forge around it, the Sylvan wouldn't be bothered by it." "Harry!" Penny was wide-eyed at seeing Harry going through his notes so fervently. He repeatedly glanced between the Isamun and the various pages he was flipping through. "Penny, do you remember what I told you about my prototype in Voldemort's book?" Harry asked the head girl suddenly. Penny was startled by the sudden question but recovered quickly. And you said it fell apart because you pushed it far past its limit. Right? Penny responded, as she recalled Harry's studying of some of the dust his prototype had turned into. Exactly, Harry nodded. A not only burnt out the array but rendered the metals themselves inert. The loss of all magic is what made the prototype practically disintegrate. What does that have to do with the Isamun? Penny questioned, not seeing where Harry was going with his line of thought. Isamun can't change by magic once it's formed, Harry beamed at her. If I make it the core of my artifact sword, it'll never be able to lose its magic. It'll be able to cut through any magic if I can give it enough power. I need to check the runic sequences of my current array, see what other sequences could be used to link them to the Isamun. Harry grabbed 3 different runecraft books and opened them on his work table. Penny couldn't help herself and broke out into a soft smile as she watched Harry get so excited about his project. The blonde watched with fondness as Harry looked through the books and compared his own notes to them. I'm completely smitten with you, aren't I? Penny whispered to herself with a small giggle. The head girl sat at the desk in the study area of the hidden workshop. She had her own studying to do after all. It was her 7th year, and she wanted to get as many O's on her NEWTs as possible. First Hogsmeade trip, hey Penny. Harry smiled at his date for the day. And good morning, Harry. Penny returned his smile. It talks out to say about you taking me on a date, she teased him slightly. Only that I now owe her one too, and that she should have been first because she knew me longer, if you must know. Harry sighed with a shake of his head. Tonks hadn't let a chance to tease him pass when he and Penny had agreed to go to Hogsmeade together. Her reply letter had included her terms for letting Penny have first date. According to the fun-loving metamorph, Harry had to take her on a date either on Yule break or at the earliest chance the following summer. Poor Harry. Too many girls? Penny giggled as they walked towards the doors. Argus Filch was checking students off his list of those allowed to go to Hogsmeade before letting them pass. I'm still trying to figure out how Tonks ended up getting her way with this relationship. Harry scratched the top of his head. Wait until Fleur asks about joining in, Penny remarked with a smirk. Why would Fleur want to join? Harry asked. We're friends, sure, but she doesn't have romantic feelings for me, does she? So, oh Harry, you have a lot of things to learn about girls. Penny chuckled as they climbed into a carriage together. But we'll never tell you what they are. She laughed at Harry's flummoxed expression. But then how can I learn? Harry asked. Penny only smiled pleasantly at him with laughter in her warm brown eyes. Their date went well, at least Harry thought so. Penny had led him around the village the first time to show him everything. They'd stopped by Scrivenshafts, peeked into Zonko's for a bit, gone to Gladrags and had a nice lunch at the Three Broomsticks. The two had left Honeydukes with a smiling Penny holding a box of Honeydukes' finest chocolates as a gift from Harry. Their next stop had been the most haunted building in Britain. But seeing the Shrieking Shack up close was kind of boring when you knew that it wasn't actually haunted. They both knew the secret of the Shrieking Shack thanks to Sirius and Remus. The fact that Remus had agreed to be defense against the dark arts professor had been quite the surprise at the beginning of the year. But Harry happily attended Dada classes that actually taught him something for the first time, though Harry found both runes and arithmancy to be kind of a letdown. Third-year classes were merely introductory material, and Harry had surpassed that before he'd ever gotten to Hogwarts. Though it was fun to chat with Professor Vector and Professor babbling about higher-level topics after classes on occasion. Hagrid's Care of Magical Creatures class was interesting, though Hagrid was slightly put out that Harry would rather harvest materials from creatures instead of raising them as pets. It was a lovely day, Harry. Penny smiled at him on their ride back to Hogwarts. It was. Harry agreed with his own smile. He was surprised when Penny leaned forward and kissed him. Their lips connected for a few moments. Harry enjoyed the soft kiss far more than anything else that day. The two separated, and Harry opened his eyes with a dopey grin. Penny looked rather pleased with herself too, and the two leaned against each other for the rest of the ride. Penny only smiled and leaned into Harry more when the younger teen's arm wrapped around her waist. The two were noticeably closer to anyone that paid attention from then on. Halloween really went all out on the decorating this year, Harry mentioned as he and Penny were enjoying the feast. Let's hope nothing horrible happens this time, he muttered. Nothing strange has happened so far, Harry. Penny reassured him with a smile. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, but 3 times is a pattern, Harry mentioned, and Penny sighed with a fond smile. Hush and enjoy the sweets, Penny giggled as she placed a spoonful of pudding into his mouth. Luna giggled from Penny's other side with her own spoonful of pudding. Albania, sis is what I need, Voldemort hissed as he looked through a weathered tome. Stephen Flint flinched at the delight in his master's tone. Because the Dark Lord currently inhabited squibs, he couldn't use a wand. But from what he'd just heard, Stephen was sure he'd be under the threat of Voldemort's wand soon enough. Flint, yes, my lord, Stephen bowed to the Dark Lord. I'll need several things to move to the next phase of my return. Voldemort stated, his red eyes locked onto the trembling wizard. You'll get them for me. Yes, my lord. Stephen didn't rise from his bow. No one in Britain would know that on this Halloween something horrible had indeed happened. Harry would actually get to fully enjoy a Halloween with nothing happening to him. But it seemed to be his fate, as long as Voldemort was alive, that Halloween would be a day that horrible things happened. First week of November. Nice. Harry smiled at the note that Taylor had just delivered to him. The dwarves had finished the DMLE's commission of 500 Auror batons. At 100 galleons per baton, Harry and the dwarves had made 50,000 galleons. With their current deal, that meant Harry now had 30,000 galleons in the expanded trunk back at Woodend Cottage. The dwarves had happily celebrated the 20,000 galleons they'd made from their work. That money would also go to expanding their offerings in the storefront of Diurn Alley. As the old saying went, you have to spend money to make money. With his fortune growing bit by bit, Harry felt confident in his future. Now if he could only get his artifact sword and other projects completed, the Artificer would be even happier. Though to be fair, Penny could be rather distracting when she wanted to be. Not that Harry was complaining. He wasn't sure just how he and Penny had ended up in Tonks's relationship idea so well, but he wouldn't trade their relationship for anything. The artifact sword was still slow going. Isamun could have runes etched into it, but finding the right sequence to link up with his already made array was difficult to say the least. Not to mention that differing materials interacted differently with certain arrays. Harry had found that out with his Ulm circuit knife after all. As of now, he was still in the planning stages of the full array he hoped to integrate into his artifact sword. The next day, breakfast. Harry smiled fondly at Hedwig as the beautiful snowy owl landed at the breakfast table. She allowed him to pet her and feed her some bacon and ham. Harry smiled as he removed the letter from her leg and she flew off to the owlery. Penny looked at who the letter was from and teasingly nudged him with her elbow. Reading the name, Harry found himself smiling too. I wonder what new thing Fleur wants to talk about. Harry smiled as he opened the letter. Reading over the French version first and smiling at having gotten most of it right when he read the English version next, Harry felt his cheeks warm up slightly. Told you so, Penny whispered into his ear. Harry refused to meet his girlfriend's eyes. Fleur had expressed interest in deepening their relationship in her letter. The picture she'd sent along with her letter, once again wearing the tiny bikini from his birthday, had made it obvious how serious the Vila girl was. This reeks of Tonks's mischief, Harry remarked as he looked at Penny out of the corner of his eye. And a certain head girl's too, now that I think about it. What, me? I'd never. Penny smiled innocently. Sure. Harry shook his head disbelievingly. How did Tonks corrupt our sweet and proper head girl? Sin, I am not corrupted. Penny huffed jokingly. I just found a good man a lot earlier in my life than I thought I would. Harry wouldn't have been able to stop the smile that spread across his face if he wanted to. His hand quickly found Penny's and entwined their fingers. How did I get so lucky? Harry murmured so only Penny could hear him. Who knows, but you might have used up all of your luck for life. Penny smiled at him with mirth. But what are you going to write back to Fleur? What should I say? Harry asked as he reread the letter. Fleur is a wonderful girl, and any man would be lucky to have her affections. But I have you and Tonks. I don't want to cheapen that. Oh, when did our Harry get so wise? Penny grinned fondly at him. And you don't have to worry about cheapening our relationship, Harry. Tonks, Fleur and I have been in contact for a bit about this already. Tonks is happy to welcome Fleur into our relationship. Are you though? Harry asked her softly. His eyes met hers, and Penny felt her heart thump in her chest at the care and affection directed at her by Harry's gaze. I've already agreed too. Penny squeezed his hand as she smiled beautifully at him. Fleur and I get along very well, not to mention she is very pretty. Can Penny? Harry choked as Penny winked at him. He grabbed his goblet and drank to clear his throat. He wasn't thinking about Penny, Tonks and Fleur being together like that. He wasn't. Tonks has most definitely corrupted you. So are you really complaining? Penny practically purred lowly to him. Absolutely not, Harry admitted instantly. Sin, I didn't think you were. Penny smirked at him. The couple only let go of each other's hand when breakfast ended and they were forced to separate. Hidden workshop after classes. Why doesn't the control sequence work? Harry murmured to himself. He was working on his mana bane chains this afternoon. Whenever he got stuck on one project, he'd simply set it aside and work on a different project. Right now, though, he was running up against another wall. The control sequence for the Mana Bane array wasn't working. Without it, the user of the chains couldn't use their own magic through the chains to manipulate them. They'd just have to swing the chains around and hope to wrap up their target. Damn it! Harry pinched the bridge of his nose. This was the pain of the inventor and craftsman, having ideas and having to try over and over again to bring them to reality. It wasn't like he couldn't take a break from this project for a while, though. He did still need to write back to Fleur and accept her offer to try dating along with Tonks and Penny. Wasn't that absolutely mind-boggling in and of itself? 3 beautiful older girls were interested in him. Definitely not how Harry had ever thought his romantic life would end up. The few times he had actually thought about it, that is. But he was very interested in all 3 of them. They were all intelligent, which Harry found attractive. Their differing personalities and interests were fun and interesting. They were also undeniably beautiful. Penny was a natural beauty. Tonks could be whatever she wanted, and had made more than enough innuendo about what she could do in the bedroom. Fleur was a Vila, and they were known for their beauty and their magical allure. What they saw in him was a bit of a mystery to the Artificer. He was younger than them. He'd had to play catch-up from being isolated from the magical world for almost a decade. Maybe he could ask them? That would be the simplest route, right? I guess I'll write Fleur back first. I can ask her while I'm accepting her feelings. Harry figured as he moved the notes on the Mana Bane to the side and pulled a fresh sheet of parchment towards himself. Afterwards, I can read more of the broom crafting book. I'm pretty sure I know enough to start planning a prototype array and item. Harry set himself to put quill to parchment and began to write to Fleur. He poured his own feelings into his response, letting her know he was happy and willing to accept her feelings. He expressed how amazing he found her and how intelligent she was. He worked his questions about how they'd make the long-distance relationship work and what she liked about him into his writing. The teen spent almost an hour on the letter, mostly stopping to worry about how to best say what he felt in writing, but that was to be expected, or at least Harry thought so. Harry sent the letter off to his French paramour just before dinner that night. Sunday. You sure you want to do this? Harry asked the dueling club members. Quite a few of them had approached Harry and Penny about practice. Penny had agreed and helped with the dueling club when she wasn't studying, doing headgirl duties, or spending time with Harry. The only reason Harry was here was because Penny couldn't make it to the club meeting. She was attending some kind of meeting with the staff and head boy Percy Weasley. Of course. Adrian Pusey nodded, the older Slytherin, along with quite a few others from his house, all looking eager. Members from the other 3 houses had formed their own groups and were waiting their turn. Harry didn't know why Penny agreed to help out, but he'd give it his best. So do you want to do this traditionally and do a series of one-on-one duels? Or are you wanting a more realistic battle? Harry questioned the older teen. Do you really think you can take on 10 of us at once? Adrian questioned, a look between shock and a sneer on his face. Many of the Slytherins had a similar look on their faces too, especially Malfoy, who was standing just behind Pusey. I should be able to, Harry informed the Slytherin team. Don't regret your choice, Potter, Adrian stated stiffly. The 9 other Slytherins all stood in line next to him, shoulder to shoulder. We still bow first, correct? Harry asked for clarification. Of course. Adrian and the Slytherins all bowed, which Harry reciprocated. As soon as they raised up from their bow, all 10 Slytherins pointed their wands at him and let loose a volley of spells. Seeing a wall of lights and sparks heading for him, Harry raised a powerful protego. The 10 spells bombarded the shield charm but dispersed without breaking through. Harry focused and 6 wands were jerked out of their owner's hands. The sudden squawks at being disarmed almost made Harry laugh. He levitated the wands over to Flitwick and Lupin, who were supervising the club. With only 4 opponents left, all of them appearing to be 6th and 7th years, Harry inhaled and breathed out the thick smoke of the Fluctus Fumus spell. I can't see! One of the Slytherins yelled. Harry heard a few spells being fired into the cloud of smoke, but he'd already moved off to the side. With a brief look of concentration, Harry formed a standard stunning spell in his palm. A moment later, along with the Slytherins finally using spells to clear the smoke, and Harry had altered the form of the charm. With a wave of his arm, a bright red wave of mana was released in a crescent shape. The wave passed through all 4 older Slytherins, making them drop to the cushioned ground. That still takes too long, Harry mused as he flexed his hand. And a widespread stunner is possible, but changing its form takes a lot of focus. Excellent work, Mr. Potter, Flitwick praised the 3rd year. Thank you, Professor. Harry bowed slightly to his head of house. So which team wants to go next? Remus asked the other 3 house groups. We'll do it, an older Gryffindor spoke up. Harry couldn't recall his name or if he'd ever met the team before. All right then, line up. Remus motioned for them to stand across from Harry. A quick bow and the match started. Harry instantly snatched the wands of 5 of the 10 Gryffindors. You'd think they'd learned from the previous match they just saw, Harry thought to himself as he projected a strong, localized protego around his forearm, and smacked away the only 2 spells that would have hit him. The Artificer sent a wave of force at the remaining 5 Gryffindors. None of them could see it as it produced no light, and all 5 staggered back. A few quick swipes of his hands and arms and his remaining 5 opponents were bound in animated ropes that wound their way around them. I believe that's the match, Remus intoned as he flicked his wand and freed the tied-up Gryffindors. Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff? Who wants to go next? Flitwick asked the 2 remaining groups. It appeared there was a small discussion between the 2 houses before Hufflepuff stepped forward. Very good, now bow and you may begin, Flitwick instructed. The group bowed to Harry and Harry returned the gesture. In the first instant of the match, Harry tried his wandless summoning trick. To his delight, he only managed to snatch 1 wand this time. At least they're learning. Harry internally praised the Hufflepuffs. He moved and swayed through the barrage of spells the Badgers were sending at him. So not letting up, using your numbers against me? That's smart and shows their trust in each other. Harry performed the Similitudo spell, and the Hufflepuffs looked shocked as 2 Harrys split and ran in opposite directions. The hesitation cost them. Harry reached out with his mana, and then performed a simple household charm. The wringing charm was a precursor to the drying charm for laundry. It spun clothes around tightly in order to squeeze water out of them so that they could dry faster on a clothesline. When used on the robes a person was wearing though. Ah, what the? Hey, ack! The Hufflepuffs quickly found their robes wrapped around them like straitjackets. The remaining 9 opponents fell to the ground as they struggled to get out of their crushing robes. Harry summoned all of their wands to himself and then ended his spell. And a wonderfully inventive use of a simple charm, Harry, Flitwick clapped. Take this to heart, students. Even charms that aren't offensive or defensive in nature can still be applied in the dueling circuit. The last group, right? Harry asked Remus. He wanted to get back to his workshop. He had projects to work on still. And yes, Harry. Remus grinned at his surrogate nephew. Ravenclaw, you're up. Say gay, go easy on us, Harry. Terry Boot, one of Harry's year mates, called out jokingly. Sure thing, Terry, Harry called back with a smile. All right, bow and you may begin, Flitwick called. As soon as the bow was finished, Harry didn't bother trying to summon his housemates' wands. A bright flash from a massive Lumos charm went off right in front of the 10 Ravenclaws. My eyes. I can't see. Where is he? Harry quickly bound all 10 of the Ravenclaws in writhing ropes. When they were bound up, he yanked all of their wands out of their hands. That wasn't easier, Harry, Terry complained as he lay on the ground tied up. Sure it was. Harry chuckled. You aren't hurt, are you? Just our pride. Richard, an older Ravenclaw in 7th year, stated as he kept his eyes closed. Well, I can't do much about that, I'm afraid. Harry shrugged. Another excellent use of a simple charm, Mr. Potter. Very well done, Flitwick congratulated his student. Mr. Potter just pulled off what's known on the dueling circuit as Bradley's Hello. It was made famous almost 3 centuries ago. Harry tuned out the rest of the dueling history lesson and approached Lupin. Well done, Harry. Lupin smiled at Harry. Do you have any advanced spells you could teach me? Harry questioned the werewolf. I've found almost everything useful that isn't in the restricted section. Some I might know a few. Remus chuckled. Let's talk about it a bit later. I still need to finish up here. Thanks, Remus, Professor Lupin. Harry smiled. Get out of here and go snog your girlfriend or something. Remus jibed. Maybe I will, Harry retorted while puffing up his chest a bit. The two parted with chuckles and Harry made his way back to his workshop. That had been a good break, but he had some projects to make progress on. Current mana levels: Harry, 5,366 Tonks, 6,858, Penelope, 5,974, Fleur, 6,138. Chapter 23, Prototypes, Creaturecraft, Sword, Penula. This is going better than I thought it would, Harry mused as he used one of the smaller fangs from the basilisk as the base for a knife. He was having a remarkably easy time forging the fang into the magical iron. As he poured his own mana into the billet of metal and bone with each strike of the hammer, the form continuously came out in the shape he wanted it in. It was almost like the conquered fang was working with him. This could also be because of the function of the fang itself. In enchanting, form and function were intrinsically linked. Making a form that went against the function more often than not resulted in failure. Likewise, trying to impart a function onto an improper form would likely fail as well. But for Harry's purposes, the fang's function, to stab, fit with the form. A knife was meant to stab and cut. With the fang's function matching with the knife's form, the creation of Harry's first creaturecraft item was apparently going to be a rousing success. Shaping the knife came next, and Harry set to the task with focus. A quick quench in the slack tub, and Harry pulled out a gleaming blade. Come to think of it, iron plus carbon makes carbon steel, right? Harry chuckled as he looked at the magical steel knife. Or would it be a basilisk steel knife because of where the carbon came from? Questions for later. Right now he needed to see if his hypothesis about the property of this knife was correct. He approached a rat, one of the many that scurried around Hogwarts, that he'd immobilized and set out on an old desk. The rat was still alive, just held immobile by his spell. With a quiet apology to the rodent, Harry pricked it with just the very tip of the knife. A few moments later the rat convulsed for a moment, squeaked softly and then laid still. Harry undid his spell and then touched the rat. Just as he suspected, the rodent was dead. The basilisk's deadly venom had been imbued as a magical effect into the basilisk steel knife. Well, this is going straight back home and into the rune safe. Harry instantly decided. It was far too dangerous to be left anywhere else. A knife that could kill with just a scratch or prick of the blade was not something Harry wanted in anyone's hands. At least no one he didn't trust implicitly at the very least. If he ever wanted a creation like this to be of use, he'd have to add some kind of security array into the handle. It would have to be something that would prevent others from using it at all. Well, at the very least, the first attempt at creaturecraft was a success. Harry thought aloud as he wrapped the basilisk steel knife up with thick parchment and leather strips. Until he could get an opportunity to go to Wood End Cottage and place it into his rune safe, this was the best he could do. He placed the wrapped knife into the bottom drawer of his work desk and closed it. He'd long ago added a ward lock to that particular drawer since it was the largest. No one would be able to open the drawer without tearing apart the work desk first. Considering the desk was also in his hidden workshop behind another ward lock and the hiding stone, Harry felt it was at least fairly safe. For now. That's another project done? Harry nodded, pleased. Now let's get these flying items working if possible. With that, the teen artificer pulled over 2 bars of magical iron, and another notebook of runic sequences and prototype arrays. Beaux Batons France, Fleur Delacour was walking on air. Harry's beautiful snowy owl had arrived this morning at breakfast with a reply from the teen. The reply had been everything she'd hoped it would be. Harry returned her feelings. His genuine feelings and the sincerity he'd written with came out as if they were face to face. The silly young man had even asked about why she felt the way she did about him, as if his charming personality and intelligence wasn't attractive enough. The teen was also one of the very few she didn't have to worry about drooling. Even those that were resistant to the villa's natural allure eventually fell victim to it after enough exposure. Harry, Tonks and Penny had no such trouble. Their alternate occlumency, as they called it, was a constant protection of the mind. So long as they had mana within them, their defenses would never wane. She was the luckiest Vila girl in the world. A charming young man truly returned her feelings without influence from the allure. She had 2 new girlfriends as well, though whether that would remain platonic or not was yet to be seen. Fleur had a feeling that Tonks at the very least wouldn't remain platonic. The metamorph was incredibly outgoing and progressive-minded. She was truly a witch of the modern era, instead of being stuck in the past like the majority of the magical world. I should write back to Harry. Fleur smiled to herself as she headed for her dorm room. Communication was key to any relationship, but even more so during a long-distance one. DMLE Ministry of Magic, London, you're telling me this item can break wards? Amelia looked the object, that Aurora Tonks had placed on her desk, over carefully. It was 5 or 6 centimeters thick and round. It looked to be made of wood and metal, the wood framing the metal disc inside. She could see dozens upon dozens of small marks on the metal, and could only surmise that they were runes of some kind. How the young artificer had etched usable runes so small she couldn't even begin to ponder. Yes, ma'am. Tonks smiled at her boss. Harry used about 20 of these to destroy the wards hiding the Chamber of Secrets. Amelia's left eyebrow raised in interest as she picked up the device. It would have its uses in the Aura Corps for sure. How many times had a criminal been able to get away in the time it took them to examine, identify, and then tear down the wards they had up? If they could use one of these to instantly dismantle the wards in question, they'd have a lot fewer suspects on the run. What are the limitations? Amelia asked as she met the eyes of her subordinate. Surely they can't break every ward out there. Oh no, they can't, Tonks shook her head. They can destroy temporary wards easily enough. Older and more powerful wards can be broken if enough of them are used together. Ancient wards like those on, say, Hogwarts, can only be temporarily disabled. Even then, it is only in one small section where the ward breakers are placed directly. Harry's break into the Chamber of Secrets only shattered the wards directly tied to the chamber. The castle wards that were disabled had already reactivated by the time the Aurors arrived to the chamber. Or at least that's what I was told. They had. Amelia confirmed. If the wards had been disabled enough, she would have taken her Aurors directly into Hogwarts through apparition or portkeys. Unfortunately, a small, bathroom-sized hole in the massive and complex wards of Hogwarts wasn't enough for that. For something so useful, I imagine we'll be spending a good chunk of our budget for enough of them to be useful for a fiscal quarter. Harry is willing to sell them, on contract, for 100 galleons apiece, Tonks informed, her hair changing from a bright pink to a dark purple. Didn't you say these were one-time use items? Amelia looked wide-eyed at the price for a one-off item. Yes, the activation of the ward breaker burns it out. Something about casting dozens of ward-breaking and dispelling charms all at once, according to Harry, Tonks explained with a shrug. She didn't understand all of the nerd talk that Harry tried to explain to her. It also redirects all negative effects of breaking said wards onto itself, so it's a much safer option than having people breaking or dispelling unknown wards in mass. The burned-out ward breaker can take the backlash and be destroyed with no further repercussions. And the Aura batons cost 100 galleons each. Amelia stated what they both knew, but yet they can be used over and over. Truthfully, they've been a blessing since we've gotten them made part of the standard issue. When wands aren't being drawn automatically to enforce the law, people seem to act more calmly and rationally. We've already broken up a few pub fights at the Leaky Cauldron, the Hogshead, and the Three Broomsticks since we've gotten them. All without a single spell being cast by an Auror. Our reputation in the public eye has gone up quite a bit in the past month because of them. The head of the DMLE sighed. Is there no way to negotiate a lower price? And Harry seemed pretty firm on the price, Tonks admitted. Since he started a full business with the dwarves, he's been getting advice on pricing and business from them. But I'll ask him. I might be able to negotiate for the first batch to be reduced price to prove their effectiveness. The baton he gifted to me went over well because you cleared me to use it in the field, so he might understand your position of needing to see it in action before you spend a large chunk of the DMLE's quarterly budget on such items. The metamorph smiled at her boss. Thank you, Aurora Tonks. Please let me know as soon as possible. Amelia gave a small smile to her subordinate. Harry told me you can keep that ward breaker. Tonks motioned to the item still lying on Amelia's desk. Though Harry did say that if you try and disassemble it that it'll burn out and destroy itself, so, yeah. He's rather protective of his runic sequences and arrays. Probably best to use it when it's really necessary. I'll remember that. Amelia nodded as she picked up the ward breaker and placed it in her desk. She quickly latched the physical lock and then spelled it closed with a few choice spells of her own. Tonks saluted as she left Amelia's office and went to return to her mentor, Mad-Eye Moody, for a patrol of Nocturne Alley. Apparently Diagon and Diurne weren't real enough in the old Senior Auror's opinion. Hogwarts. Penny sighed. She was trying to keep her composure and remain calm. She was the good prefect that all the younger Ravenclaws looked up to since her 5th year. Now she was head girl and expected to be a good example for the entire student body, but there was only so much even she could take. Percy Weasley's attempts to woo her were far and away the fastest things to wear down her patience these days. The head boy just wouldn't take a hint. If he'd shown interest a few years ago, maybe she'd have given the redhead a chance. As it stood now though, and had since last school year, she was interested in someone else. The fact that her relationship with Harry was official now only made Percy's continued attempts more annoying. So you see, Penelope, we could have a very lovely time together at the next Hogsmeade trip. Percy prattled on, not so much talking to her as he was talking at her. For the last time, Percy, I'm not interested, and I have a boyfriend. Penny exhaled with a gusty sigh. I appreciate your feelings, but I can't and don't return them. Harry Potter is much too young for such things. Percy dismissed casually. Senhi is only 13 and you are a legal adult of 17 now. It would be proper for you two to end this dalliance before people start to whisper about it. Penny felt her anger flare up at the redhead's dismissal of her and Harry's relationship. Sure, there was a small age gap between them, but that was no one's business but their own. The law of magical Britain literally had a 7-year clause in it for couples that started dating in their teen years. Hell, most people in magical Britain referred to it as the Hogwarts Clause. It basically stated that if one partner attained their maturity before the other, their relationship would not be deemed illegal or inappropriate in the eyes of the law. It had been on the books for almost 400 years already. No one had any inclination to try and change it. So Percy bringing it up showed he either didn't know the law, or he just didn't care and was going after her because he wanted her for himself. Harry Potter is the youngest artificer in history, Penny began as she whirled around with a glare. Harry Potter is a wonderful young man that treats me like a queen. Harry Potter is intelligent, kind, thoughtful, admirable, and brilliant. Harry Potter is a better wizard and a better person than you'll ever be. You are a dismissive, arrogant, pompous, self-righteous, brown nose who can barely think for himself. Percy reeled back as if he'd been struck and stared at Penny wide-eyed. Get this through your head, Weasley. I am not interested. Leave me alone. Penny practically growled at the head boy. She held up her right hand and flames appeared, swirling and thrashing around as if they were alive. The next time you try to talk at me like I'm lesser than you, or the next time I hear a single bad word about Harry from you, then you'll be facing me in an honor duel. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Penny demanded as she glared into Percy's eyes. Yes, very well then, Penelope, I'll just be going. Percy turned and quickly walked off, just short of jogging away from the incensed blonde. Penny huffed as she dispelled the flames in her palm and continued on her way. Maybe now the Prat would finally leave her alone. Walking up to the door to the hidden workshop, Penny felt a smile return to her face reflexively. Having been keyed into the updated ward lock near the end of last year, Penny opened the door easily. Seeing Harry floating against the ceiling with a plate of metal tied to each of his shins was a surprise, but it only made her giggle as she closed the door. Having fun, Harry? Penny asked with a grin. Oh, loads. Harry smiled down at her from the ceiling. Can you get down? She asked with a suppressed chuckle. I can fall down, Harry admitted after a moment. A no control? Penny giggled as she reached out with her mana and slowly brought Harry down. There was quite a lot of resistance to her spell though, almost like trying to pull an air-filled beach ball underwater. The directional sequence and the altitude sequence both failed, Harry explained as he deactivated the metal plates. He untied them from his shins one by one and set them on top of his work desk. I'm not sure why they failed though, so until I can figure that out, I'm back to square one for my own flying item. I think I can take your mind off that. Penny smiled at him. She then pulled him into a sweet kiss, and the two enjoyed their lip lock for a few moments. Forget what? Harry asked as they separated. Oh, exactly. Penny giggled as they held each other. This affection and love was what that Prat Percy would never understand. Harry and Penny would spend the rest of the afternoon cuddling. Penny told Harry of Percy's attempt at wooing her, and Harry shook his head. All of Hogwarts already knew about their relationship, so Harry didn't understand what the head boy thought he was going to accomplish. If he was being honest, Harry was surprised their relationship hadn't made it into the Daily Prophet yet. Then again, that was probably only a matter of time. Maybe he should talk with Sirius about getting a solicitor just in case. Friday, November 19th. After classes, Expecto Patronum? Harry called out as he held his wand aloft. From the tip of the holly and phoenix feather wand came a cloud of bright silvery mist. Harry sighed as the mist spread, thinned out, and then disappeared. That was very good, Harry. Remus congratulated the artificer. Not complete though. Harry huffed as he thought over the spell. The Patronus charm worked off of understanding the spell itself plus a powerful happy emotion. At the moment Harry was using the memories of his relationship with Tonks, Penny and Fleur. They'd shown the most results so far and had taken him from mere wisps to the bright mist. But the Patronus is very advanced spell work, Harry. Remus assured his surrogate nephew. Most wizards and witches never learn it, and even those that do learn often can't complete it and make a corporeal Patronus. Maybe not, Harry shook his head, but I don't like leaving spells unfinished and not mastered. Though, to Harry's annoyance, without his wand he couldn't get the Patronus charm to form at all. Not even a wisp of the silvery mist. This frustrated the teen wizard to no end. He was used to being able to cast spells without need of a focus. To find a spell that he couldn't use wandlessly, and then find out he couldn't complete it even with a wand, was maddening to the Harry. Give it some time. You've only been practicing for just over a week. Try to find an even happier memory if you can, Remus advised. It can only help. And, I'll try, Harry agreed, as he stowed his wand back in his holster and bid Remus a good afternoon. Leaving the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Harry made his way to his workshop. A bit of work with runecraft should help take his mind off his failure with the Patronus charm. Entering his workshop, Harry was surprised to see Tonks sitting in a chair next to his work desk. "Hiya, Harry," Tonks greeted cheerfully with a wave. "Hey Tonks, didn't know you were coming for a visit." Harry smiled at his oldest girlfriend. That thought was still enough to put a smile on his face. He walked over to her and pulled her into a hug. Tonks returned the embrace with a smile and kissed his cheek for good measure. "This isn't entirely a personal visit, I'm afraid." Tonks grinned at him. "It was hard to get a visit with you between work and having to schedule a time when I wouldn't interrupt lessons." According to McGonagall, both of them chuckled at the stern deputy headmistress. "So, what is the non-personal reason for your visit, Nim?" Harry used the name only he was allowed to use with Tonks. Technically, Penny and Fleur could get away with it too, but Tonks didn't want anyone thinking they could get away with using her first name or any derivative of it. She grinned mischievously as he sat down while she stood up. "Well, Harry, as your sales girl to the DMLE, I've come across a bit of a roadblock with the ward breakers." Tonks began as she walked around the desk to stand at his side. "What kind of roadblock?" Harry raised an eyebrow in question. "Madam Bones is a bit put off by the price of a one-use item," Tonks informed him with her grin still in place. "She was hoping that you'd negotiate a lower price. I was advised by the dwarves that the ward breakers were worth at least 100 galleons each. I'd rather not turn my back on their advice or business acumen," Harry told his, currently blue-haired girlfriend. "Yeah, I told her you were pretty firm on the price." Tonks chuckled as she undid the clasp of her robe and shrugged it off. Harry's eyes took in her t-shirt and jeans quickly. But I told her I'd try to negotiate with you about reducing the cost of the First Order, just so the DMLE can see how useful the ward breakers are." "Negotiate, huh?" Harry smiled at her and Tonks returned it. The metamorph straddled his lap and brought their lips together. The couple happily kissed for a bit, just enjoying being close after their separation by Hogwarts restarting. Tonks deepened the kiss and tongues came into play. Harry had no real experience with French kissing, so Tonks guided him. Small moans emerged from their lips as they indulged and eventually pulled back slightly out of breath. "So Harry, about that discount," Tonks grinned teasingly. Harry played as if he was thinking hard about it before replying. "I guess I could accept a 10% discount on the First Order." Harry grinned at her. Watching her hair turn pink and lengthen slightly, Harry chuckled. Tonks liked to change her hair on the whim after all. This seemed more deliberate though. "I think we can do better." Tonks laughed as her t-shirt suddenly stretched across her swelling bosom. "How about this?" With that, she reached down and grabbed the hem of her shirt. Slowly she pulled it up and Harry watched transfixed as her large breasts got caught on the hem. With a teasing wink, Tonks bounced a bit on his lap until her breasts bounced out of her shirt. Harry, like any teenager, happily took in the sight of such large perky boobs. The fact that they were right in his face only made it better. "Maybe 15%. Harry muttered as he took in the sight of his girlfriend's breasts. Tonks cracked up before she took his hands and placed them on her chest. "Untouch them, Harry," Tonks encouraged him with a warm smile. Honestly, neither of them really cared about the discount. It was just a fun game to play while they furthered their relationship. Harry gently cupped her large breasts before giving them a gentle squeeze. Tonks hummed in pleasure as Harry got more and more into his exploration. "They're so soft," Harry murmured as he explored Tonks's chest. "Do you like my tits, Harry?" Tonks asked rhetorically. "They're amazing," Harry replied anyway, as his thumbs brushed over the hardened nipples, drawing a short gasp from her. 20% off amazing? Tonks continued their little game with a grin. "I guess." Harry gave her a grin of his own. She giggled a bit since his hands hadn't stopped their fondling of her boobs even as he said this. "Then how about this?" Tonks questioned as she moved his hands from her breasts and pulled his face into them. Harry was shocked for a bit. He felt his cheeks heat up in nervousness. But then he buried his face into the soft boobs. Tonks gently ran her fingers through his hair as he nuzzled her breasts. A few moments later she gasped as Harry took one of her nipples into his mouth and began to lick and suck on it. "Harry, naughty artificer, aren't you as I try?" Harry mumbled as his face was still buried in boobs. "Then your corruption is almost complete." Tonks chuckled as she rolled her hips on his lap. Suck on my tits." "One yes," Harry replied as he switched nipples and Tonks pulled him closer. His hands quickly found her bum and began to squeeze. Tonks hummed contently as she rolled her hips in time with his squeezes. All right, lucky boy," Tonks chuckled as she reluctantly pulled Harry's mouth away from her tits. "That's enough for now." "Pshaw," Harry groaned. "Do we have to stop?" Tonks chuckled considering his hands hadn't left her ass yet. I think that was worth a 30% discount, don't you? Tonks questioned with a playful wink. 25 because I wanted more. Harry countered even as his hands fondled her bum. Deal. Tonks laughed before their lips met again. She'd only intended to seal the deal with a kiss. But that quickly became another makeout session, French kissing and all. Pulling away a minute later, Tonks gazed at him lovingly. All right now, mister. I do have to go soon. McGonagall said I needed to leave before dinner. Apparently meals are also something I'm not allowed to interrupt. All right, Harry grumbled as Tonks got off his lap and pulled her shirt down. She picked up her robe and put it back on, using her wandless magic to brush the dirt and dust off of it. I'll see you on Yule break, Harry. Tonks smiled at him. Harry stood up and pecked her lips. She kissed his cheek in return and they left the workshop together. With one last hug, Harry headed towards the Great Hall. Tonks headed back to McGonagall's office to use the flue. It was the same way she got into Hogwarts, and so it was the same way she had to leave. Well, unless she wanted McGonagall to hunt her down at any rate. Friday, December R&D after classes. I'm still against this. Penny informed Harry for the third time that day. I know, Penny, but it's the only way. Harry smiled, trying to reassure his girlfriend. Are you sure you can't do this another way? Penny questioned. Her worries for him clear in her eyes. Insist is the best way I could find, Penny. Harry shook his head. Fine, but I don't like it, Penny grumbled, and Harry pulled her into a hug. She held him tightly, as if afraid to let him go. It's just for the weekend, and then it'll be done, Harry assured her. Penny sighed but nodded her acceptance. With that, Harry locked himself inside the hidden workshop, until he finished the culmination of 2 years' worth of planning, learning, testing, failing, succeeding, and multiple prototypes. Harry entered his smithy, and gathered his materials together. Sylvain was ready to go. Vitris Auri was prepared and being kept liquid at the moment. Isamun was etched with the proper runic sequence. Everything was ready to go. With everything checked, Harry ignited the forge and started working the temperature higher. Forging out a billet of Sylvain, Harry pounded it into proper length and shape. His mana was poured into the metal with each strike, and the metal of his own alchemic creation formed to his desires. He'd only have one chance at this. He'd have to spend the next 2 days only eating quick meals and sleeping in 1 or perhaps 2-hour naps at a time. Saturday, December 4th, sunrise, sweat poured down Harry's body. The slight musculature he'd been developing since puberty started was being pushed to its limits. Isamun couldn't be changed by magic after it had been formed. It could only be etched with runes. Forging out a Sylvain and Vitris Auri guard, and etching the corresponding runic sequence into it to tie the Isamun to the rest of the blade was a challenge. It was why he couldn't do this on a normal sleep schedule. Each new piece of his sword had to be created to the exact form to match up with the Isamun and the rest of the materials. Etching still warm metal had led to a few small burns already, but it was absolutely critical that the sequences matched and lined up properly. Any mistakes would cost him the sword and all the effort he'd put into it. Come on, Potter, head in the game. Harry shook himself back into focus. He pounded the handle of the sword into proper shape with swing after swing. His arms hurt, but his mana would compensate for physical fatigue right now. He still had to bond the blade and Isamun together, and then etch and fill in the Sylvain with the Vitris Auri. After that was done, he'd have to let it cool slowly in the forge. Then a last addition of Sylvain to complete the blade, and only then would he be able to see the finish line. Sunday, December 5th afternoon. Almost there, Harry repeated like a mantra as his hands, burned in multiple places, filled in the last of the runes on the handle and guard with his own blood. His alchemic pen had been filled with his very lifeblood to complete this second-to-last step. This was to bind the artifact sword to his bloodline. Every descendant would be able to add their blood to the sword. His children when he eventually passed it on, their children when they received it, then their children's children, and so on. Each time the half of the blood that could be traced back to him would be linked and form a chain through the generations. No one that wasn't part of his direct descent would be able to access the sword's innate power. It would just be a rather powerful magic sword in their hands. Only a Potter bound to the sword through blood would be able to use the true abilities that his sword possessed. Last step. Harry huffed as he took the hot, forged, etched and filled sword to the quench tank. He filled the still hot blade with his mana, and then dunked it. Harry poured everything he had left of his mana into the sword. If a non-magical blacksmith had tried to do this, all the different metals being this hot would have reacted differently to being quenched, and the sword would most likely have cracked. Harry's very will, through his mana, was keeping the magic sword together as it cooled and solidified into the finished piece. While he was linked through his mana to the sword, he could feel and know everything about it. It was an odd experience. He could literally feel all the work and effort that went into making each constituent part of the sword. He felt as they all came together in the quench tank. Then he felt what he could only describe as a pulse move through him from the sword. A new magical presence now existed in the smithy, very similar to Harry's own but still entirely unique. "There you are." Harry chuckled as he pulled the sword out of the tank with shaky arms. To Harry's eyes, through the skill he'd learned and developed to examine magical items, he saw the magical aura around his finished sword. Powerful but sedate, as if waiting for when it was needed. His sword was a masterwork if he did say so himself. Taking the sword over to his work table inside the smithy, he set about cleaning it with shaky hands. He'd need to craft a nice handle for it. The metal was the proper shape, now it just needed wood, or perhaps bone, and maybe some leather. "Now there's a pretty sword," Harry whispered to the blade as he finished cleaning it. "Harry," Penny called as she knocked on the smithy door. "Harry, are you all right?" Harry really wanted to answer her, but he was done. The ache in his body was real. There was a deep, bone-deep exhaustion setting in now that his task was done. He was able to turn his head and see Penny opening the door. Her warm brown eyes widened when they saw the state he was in. "Harry." The blonde-haired girl rushed over to him and took him into her arms. "Hey, Penny, I finished my sword," Harry whispered tiredly. "I can see that." Penny only glanced briefly at the sword lying on the work table. "What did you do to yourself, Harry? You're shaking, burned, and your hands are a mess." She pulled him against her gently as she laid her head on top of his. "I think you went too far too soon, Harry." Maybe. Harry attempted to shrug, though the best he got was a slight shake of his shoulders. "We're going to Madame Pomfrey, no arguments," Penny informed him as she used her wandless magic to levitate him. "Okay," Harry murmured tiredly as he started to doze off. His last thought was about how strong his artifact sword felt. He was damn proud of the magical power he'd felt in his blade. It was far stronger than he was right now. Artifacts could be stronger than the one that made them. Base magical power for an artifact was determined by the materials used, the power of the Artificer, and the skill of the said Artificer. Isamun, Sylvuan, Vitrisari, and Wizardblood were all decently magically powerful. Isamun was clearly the most powerful of the materials by far, but Harry had poured his own mana into the sword throughout its creation, only recovering an hour's worth of rest for his mana. Sometimes two. Between cycles of forging, etching, and hammering, he'd poured every bit of his mana into his creation on Friday, Saturday, and today. If the arithmancy was correct, Harry's artifact sword should possess almost 3 times the power he currently did. It was truly an amazingly powerful sword. Its use as a focus would see it standing toe-to-toe with even legends like the Sword of Erdun, perhaps even mythical blades said to be created or given by gods. Though that would remain to be seen for now. For now Harry was damn tired. Spending 3 days physically exerting oneself while constantly keeping yourself in a state of near magical exhaustion would do that. Harry could ponder no more as he fell asleep before they were even out of the corridor his hidden workshop was in. Current mana levels. Harry, Tonks, Penelope, Fleur, Chapter, Recovery, Testing, Panel. Harry sighed as Madame Pomfrey hovered around him. The matron of the hospital wing had been fretting over him since yesterday. Penny had levitated him here after he'd finished his artifact sword and fallen asleep. Seeing a student exhausted, physically and magically, burned in various areas, and brought in unconscious, had almost sent Pomfrey into a fit. He'd woken up this morning to 3 vials of potion he had to drink. Not the most pleasant thing to do first thing in the morning. Penny had visited at breakfast and stayed with him until classes began, so that was nice. Now came what he was expecting since he woke up. "Good morning, Mr. Potter." Dumbledore smiled at the teen artificer. "And good morning, Headmaster." Harry returned the greeting. "You gave us quite the shock when Head Girl Clearwater brought you into the hospital wing yesterday," Dumbledore informed him with a classic, worried grandfather look. Harry figured the man had decades to perfect said look. The headmaster was somewhere north of 130 years old. "Sorry about that, Headmaster." Harry apologized with a slight bow of his head. "And I had thrown myself into my work a bit too much. Or at least that's what Penny says I did." He cracked a slight grin. "Being passionate about one's work is a good thing." Dumbledore nodded, with a small smile of his own. But we can't have students harming themselves like that. Poppy tells me that you had both muscular fatigue and symptoms of prolonged magical exhaustion. Could you tell me how your enchanting brought you to such a state?" "Said he wasn't just enchanting, Headmaster." Harry shook his head. Seeing Dumbledore's curious look, he continued. "So I was artificing. I finished a project 2 years in the making, sir. You've crafted another artifact? Dumbledore looked a mix of impressed and confused. Your last artifact did not leave you in such a ragged state, Mr. Potter. My rune safe was almost accidental in its artifact status, Harry admitted with a shrug. This time I fully intended to create an artifact, a powerful one at that. Might I inquire as to what artifact now resides in Hogwarts? Dumbledore questioned, his tone noticeably different. Harry looked at Headmaster Dumbledore right now, he realized, rather than the genial grandfather figure he acted as for others. A sword that cannot cut anything. Harry let himself smile slightly. And cannot cut anything? Dumbledore looked truly confused, and Harry wondered how rare that look actually was. Nothing physical anyway. Harry shrugged with a shake of his head. I must admit to my curiosity. Dumbledore gave his grandfatherly smile. And still have to craft a handle and a sheath for it, Harry remarked thoughtfully. Then I'll need to test out its full capabilities, of course. Once that's done, I'll need another panel of artificers to come and examine it themselves. Mr. Potter? Dumbledore interrupted the teen's planning. Harry looked at the old man after blinking for a second. While it is fine to make plans, as headmaster I do still need to know if this sword is in any way dangerous to the students or staff. Oh, right, well, it shouldn't be. Harry shook his head. It can't cut anything physical. I guess you could still hit someone with it, but that's true of a beater's bat too. As for my sword, it's a spell cleaver. It cuts through magic rather than things. Shoe and Spain, spell cleaver? Dumbledore looked perplexed. I don't think I've come across that term before, and I might have made it up for all I know. Harry gave a half shrug. I made my sword unable to cut physical objects in exchange for cutting through all forms of magic. Well, theoretically anyway. I still have to test it to find out its limitations. And that still could prove dangerous, Mr. Potter. Dumbledore gave him a look. It's not nearly so dangerous in anyone else's hands, Headmaster. Harry raised his hands in front of him. I've already tied it to my bloodline. No one but I can currently use the full range of my sword's abilities. Not until I have children at any rate, which I don't plan on for quite a few more years. He chuckled, and Dumbledore looked mirthful as well. Very well, Mr. Potter. Dumbledore stood from his chair. I would like to be present for your tests of this artifact, however, for safety's sake, as well as damage control if something should go wrong. I can agree to that. Harry nodded. Dumbledore smiled at him again. Wish you a speedy recovery, Mr. Potter. I'm sure Head Girl Clearwater will make sure that you don't fall behind on your classwork. Dumbledore mentioned with a chuckle. A good day to you, Mr. Potter. And to you as well, Headmaster. Harry nodded. Dumbledore left the hospital wing shortly afterwards, and Harry was left to run ideas through his mind. Lunch came and went quietly. Like clockwork, Penny came in after classes with his daily assignments and homework. Harry pretended to pout, but Penny was having none of it, so Harry set to work with his girlfriend by his side. They had dinner together in the hospital wing that evening. Madame Pomfrey had shooed Penny out afterwards and began to check Harry over with her wand. Well, Mr. Potter, the good news is, you seem to be mostly well again. Your magic is still rather low, though. You'll be staying another day while I check your recovery, Madame Pomfrey informed the teen. Yes, ma'am, Harry replied with a sigh. Penny would insist he stay if Madame Pomfrey recommended it. There wasn't much point in arguing. He wondered if it would be tomorrow or the day after when he'd receive a written reprimand from Tonks and one from Fleur as well. Knowing Penny, she had already written to the others. He should be thankful to Hogwarts, really. It was currently acting as a barrier between him and Tonks's worry and frustration with him. I'll make her something nice for her birthday, Harry thought to himself as he lay down for the night. She'll forgive me then, probably. Tuesday, second day of recovery. It was a fairly quiet day in the hospital wing. Penny came to have breakfast with him again. Harry finished his homework from yesterday. Penny came with Hermione, Padma, Mandy, and Luna after classes. How'd you do this to yourself, Harry? Hermione asked gently. Harry looked fine now, but Penny had informed them of Madame Pomfrey's initial diagnosis. All of his study buddies looked curious as well. Artificing is a bit different from enchanting, Hermione, Harry informed the brunette. To create a true artifact takes time, a lot of trial and error, testing, and quite a bit of mana. My rune safe was a fairly tame creation in comparison to most artifacts, but it was only a minor artifact because of its construction and limit of use. This time I went for a much more powerful artifact, so the amount of time and mana needed to create it increased proportionately. So, what did you make? Mandy questioned, her dark brown eyes curious. What, the sword? Harry replied with a grin. And artifact sword? Padma blinked at like the sword of Gryffindor or Excalibur? not sure it can compare to Excalibur, since no one seems to know all that much about that particular sword, but it can probably stand on a similar level of the Sword of Gryffindor." Harry smiled. He happily omitted any knowledge of the Sword of Gryffindor becoming the Sword of Erdun. He wouldn't want that bit of information to get out for a while after all. "Can we see it?" Luna asked with an excited grin. "When I'm done testing it and making a sheath for it." Harry nodded to the small blonde who smiled brightly. "I brought your classwork and homework for the day, Harry." Penny smiled at him. Harry could see the amusement Penny was getting from delivering his schoolwork to him. He'd take it though, give Penny this small revenge for worrying her like he'd done. "Thank you, Penny." Harry looked at her flatly. Penny was still all smiles as she handed him the assignments. Wednesday after classes, intent-based wards aren't easy. Harry grimaced as he looked through a large tome on warding. To determine intent and then prevent certain actions, such as entering an area or picking something up, was quite the arithmancy puzzle. Luckily for Harry, it was also a well-researched branch of warding, so he was able to find some examples. Taking some basilisk bone, Harry set about hollowing it out and shaping it with his blacksmithing tools. After some time he'd gotten the bone hollowed out to fit the tang of his blade. Shaping it down into a handle was then followed by etching the ward sequence into the bone. Harry primed the ward on the new handle with his own mana, and then attached it to his artifact sword. Seeing the ward sequence glow brightly, and then dim, made Harry smile. The handle had integrated properly, and now the ward on the handle was part of the sword as a whole. "Now I'll wrap it with leather, and then I'll get to work on carving and forming a sheath for it," Harry planned aloud as he worked. It had been a while since Harry had worked with wood. Luckily he happened to live right next to the most magical forest in Britain for 10 months of the year. He had plenty of wood, both magical and non-magical, to work with. A quick call to Taylor and the family house elf was more than happy to quickly pop around the edge of the forbidden forest and collect sections of wood. The forest was absolutely full of fallen trees and branches after all. He might as well make use of them. Thursday after classes, "What are you going over so thoroughly, Harry?" Penny asked her boyfriend with a fond smile. "I'm making the sheath for my artifact sword." Harry smiled back as he showed Penny his work. "You remember that spell ward idea I showed you in my journal? I should be able to make it work with this. A sheath's function is to hold a blade and to protect anyone from its edge. If I match that function of protection with a similar array, then I should be able to create a sheath that blocks spells, including things like summoning charms and the like. That'll keep the sword from being taken while it's sheathed." "And you're really taking safety seriously for this sword, Harry. I'm impressed." Penny pulled him into a side hug. "And I have to be. It's a very powerful artifact, one that I'll pass down to children someday." Harry looked at her with a soft grin. Penny's cheeks went pink before she kissed his cheek. "Don't go making plans that far in advance just yet, boyfriend of mine." Penny giggled. "Neither of us is ready for that kind of responsibility yet. And maybe not, but it's good to plan ahead when possible." Harry chuckled. "Don't forget your homework, though," Penny teased him with a grin. "Yes, mother." Harry jokingly rolled his eyes. He broke into a laugh when he felt a ball of mana pop against his head. Saturday. Harry spent most of the morning carving out a length of wood for his sheath from a thick fallen limb of an ancient magical oak tree. Taylor had, as most well-treated house elves often did, gone above and beyond for him. She'd gone far deeper into the forbidden forest than he intended for her to. But her results spoke for themselves. The thick fallen limb she'd brought back still lingered with magic even though it was probably separated from the tree many years ago. It showed none of the usual signs of decay and rot, only being dry enough to work with. Taylor wouldn't accept any kind of reward, of course. But Harry had almost made the house elf burst into happy tears with the sincere and genuine thanks he lavished on her. He was sure the elf was probably still dancing around Wood End Cottage from her joy. By the afternoon he had the two halves of his sheath carved and hollowed out to carefully hold his sword. Now came the time to etch the spell ward array he'd developed. He was going to make sure he wouldn't have to replace the sheath for decades by making it to the best of his ability. For that very reason he was using Sylvan as the rune material to fill in the etchings. Covering the wood in conquered basilisk hide would also increase the magic resistance the sheath had. Penny had come to watch him most of the day as he worked. She worked on her own homework, and also made sure he took breaks for meals. When Harry sealed the edges of the two halves into the form of the sheath that evening, he smiled. Carving a permanent adherence sequence onto the outside of the sheath, Harry carefully attached the basilisk hide to the length of the sheath. He capped both ends of the sheath with Sylvan as well for durability. Both would also permanently attach to the sheath to make sure it stayed together. A bloody good enchanted object, if I do say so myself. Harry congratulated himself with a grin as he finally sheathed his artifact sword for the first time. With this, he was now ready to test the sword. Lucky for him, tomorrow was Sunday, so he had all day free. Sunday morning after breakfast, Headmaster Professor Flitwick, "Glad you both could come." Harry welcomed Dumbledore and his head of house. Penny was already with him and his study buddies all stood behind her eagerly. "I must say, Mr. Potter, for a young man you cut an impressive figure with that sword on your hip." Flitwick smiled at his student. Indeed, Harry had his sheathed sword on his left hip and looked stronger for it. Whether that was because the boy was in the middle of a growth spurt or was entirely caused by the sword's presence was something the short wizard didn't think about. "Thank you, sir." Harry nodded to his head of house. "And I wouldn't want to miss this, Mr. Potter," Dumbledore smiled genially. "I'll trust in your skills as an artificer. But it makes me worry less to have members of the faculty present for these tests, in case anything was to go wrong." "That's understandable, Headmaster," Harry agreed. "Thank you both for taking time out of your day to supervise." Both professors gave him smiles and waved away his thanks. Harry walked over to Penny, who would be helping him test a few things. "Ready?" Penny asked him with a grin. "As I'll ever be." Harry nodded back with confidence. The two walked a good distance away from the others, and Harry drew the sword. None of the onlookers saw much special about the sword. It was shiny, maybe unnaturally so, but the blade was fairly plain. It didn't look any different than a regular double-edged sword. The guard appeared to be the same metal as the blade but inlaid with what looked like gold. The handle of the sword appeared to be leather-wrapped and nothing fancy. "Huh, I thought it would be fancier," Mandy commented. She got agreeing nods from Hermione and Padma. Luna just watched on with a smile. "Test 1, weaker spells, let's begin." Harry nodded to Penny. Penny returned the nod and held up her hand. From her fingers the blue bolt of a Flipendo Jinx was launched at Harry. Harry brought his sword up and as soon as the Jinx touched the blade it vanished. "Looks like it worked." Penny smiled at seeing the success. "Let's keep going." Harry grinned as he motioned for Penny to use another spell. Dumbledore, Flitwick, Padma, Hermione, Luna and Mandy all watched on as spell after spell disappeared as soon as it made contact with the blade. Stinging hexes vanished, Expelliarmus was blocked, and even a stunning spell simply disappeared when it came in contact with the sword. "All right, I'm going to use a fireball, if you're ready," Penny told Harry. The artificer only nodded back eagerly. Penny sighed even as a grin made its way onto her face. Harry would always be ready to test out his creations, regardless of the fact that he might get injured. "All right, here it comes." The head girl conjured a fireball into her palm with a snap. She then sent it towards Harry with a thought. It could have been a little faster. Harry chuckled as he watched the fireball move towards him at the equivalent of jogging speed. When it was close enough, Harry raised his sword, and the fireball dispersed when it touched the blade. Well, that proves that conjured elements can be dispersed. "Should I try a water ball next?" Penny asked from her position. Harry gave her a nod, and the blonde conjured the sphere of water. Sending it towards Harry at the same speed as the fireball, they were all pleased to see the conjured water vanish just the same. "Time to really test out the range I can give this," Harry announced, and Penny looked at him worriedly, while everyone else just looked confused. Harry raised his left hand and concentrated. Far above him, at least 50 meters in the air, a large fireball crackled into existence. The sphere of flames was easily the size of a carriage, and Harry yanked his hand down in a fist. The large fireball came descending down with speed and Harry took his sword in both hands. The blade glowed faintly white-blue and Harry swung it towards the descending fireball before it had cleared even half the distance. "My word!" Dumbledore breathed out, even as his wand was in his hand and pointing towards Harry to shield him from the flames if necessary. The near-transparent wave of magic had passed through the fireball without even slowing down. The large mass of flames dispersing into nothing near instantly as the wave touched them. "Success!" Harry laughed. He laughed even more when he saw the absolutely massive ball of water Penny had conjured in response to him throwing a huge fireball at himself. His girlfriend was always looking out for him, and it brought a warm smile to his lips. With another swing of his sword he made the water vanish as well. "I'm fine, Penny, thank you though. I appreciate your concern." "Well, someone has to be concerned for you." Penny raised one of her eyebrows. We obviously can't trust you to be concerned for yourself. That's unfair and untrue." Harry replied with a faux offended look on his face. "Oh, is it?" Penny arched her eyebrow fully. "Sort of." Harry barely restrained a smile. "Why do I love you again?" Penny sighed with a warm look in her eyes. Because I challenge you intellectually, because I'm interesting, because I make you nice things, because I'm devilishly good looking, I can keep going." Harry laughed. "Picking up some habits from Sirius, I see." Penny could barely stifle her giggles at Harry's silliness. "I'm not that bad," Harry cried in mock indignation. Penny burst into laughter at that, and Harry chuckled along with her. All right, you wanted to test the sword's ability as a focus too, right?" Penny asked, after her bout of laughter subsided. "Yeah, I should be able to cast spells through it. How much of the sword's power I use should be able to be controlled as well?" Harry mused, as he looked his sword over. "Send me a wave of spells, even if they're all the same. Just send too many for me to have even a chance of blocking with the sword. I'll try out Protego first." "All right, a swarm of stinging hexes for Harry," Penny sing-songed with a grin. "Thanks," Harry replied flatly as he walked back to a suitable distance for the test. "Hey, go!" he gave the signal. From Penny's hands came a burst of the small orange lights of the stinging hex. There were easily 24 of the balls of light heading for him at a good speed. Harry focused, feeling the deep connection he had to his sword. He pointed the sword towards the incoming spells. A large white Protego, far larger than anything Harry had ever cast before, appeared between him and the stinging hexes. The little orange lights were negated instantly upon touching the shield charm. "Incredible!" Flitwick cheered at seeing the massive Protego. It was the largest he'd ever seen before, easily dozens of meters in diameter. Harry could shield from almost any spell Flitwick could think of with a charm that strong. "Penny, stand in front of the others, please," Harry requested. Penny looked confused but did as Harry asked. Harry let his next spell flow through the sword as easily as he did with his wand. With a downward swing, a thin line of pressurized water was released that cut cleanly through the dirt for several meters. Noting that it didn't take nearly as much mana to perform that spell as it did when he used it wandlessly, Harry smiled. It was further proof that his sword was an efficient focus too. Harry pointed the blade straight up, right at the sky, and tapped into about half the sword's power. The flames that came from the sword must have reached close to 50 meters into the air. It was like watching a fully grown dragon breathe fire. "Oh my lord!" Hermione exclaimed in shock, as seeing the potent effect of the sword. "Oh, and last test," Harry called out to everyone watching. "Full power this time." "Scent wasn't full power?" Padma cried out, her eyes wide and jaw almost on the ground. The artifact sword sparked along the length of the blade as Harry channeled the Fulman curse through it. Tapping into the full power of his sword, Harry let it empower the curse. With a helm splitter swing straight down, Harry cast the curse. Lightning cracked through the air and a massive arc of electricity that tore through the ground and sizzled through the air. The loud thunderclap that followed from the superheated air was near deafening. The arc of lightning traveled in a straight line for almost 100 meters before dissipating, leaving behind a deeply gouged trench through the ground that let off a few small sparks occasionally. Hermione, Padma, and Mandy all collapsed in shock as they stared at what Harry had accomplished with a single spell and a swing of his sword. That was insane. Harry was only 13 and he was already capable of creating artifacts this powerful. What would he be like in a decade? Luna was clapping wildly, apparently thrilled by the show. Penny just stared critically at what her boyfriend had just done, her curious and inquisitive mind trying to extrapolate how much mana the sword provided and how much Harry provided to that curse. "Mr. Potter!" Dumbledore called out the teen artificer as he looked over his sword. "Is Headmaster?" Harry looked towards the old man and Flitwick, both of whom were rushing towards him. "I'm going to have to ask you to refrain from doing anything like that again on school grounds, Mr. Potter," Dumbledore told the third-year student with a serious look on his face. While it was very impressive, it was also highly dangerous. "Understandable, Headmaster. I'll refrain from using the full power of my sword while on the grounds of Hogwarts," Harry agreed. "Though I may need an exemption from that whenever we can arrange for a panel of artificers to come and certify my sword as an artifact. They'll need to run their own tests, and I've already locked the sword to my bloodline. Only I and my direct descendants will be able to use this sword like I just did." "Scent is reassuring at least." Dumbledore nodded. He'd seen the horrors that could be wrought by a wizard with a powerful focus before. If Harry's sword could be wielded by anyone, then he'd fear for the future should a dark wizard ever get their hands on it. Knowing that was an impossibility, even if they did possess the blade, cleared up the majority of Dumbledore's concerns already. "Simply incredible, Mr. Potter." Flitwick congratulated his student. "Never in all my years have I seen such a remarkable focus." "Thank you, Professor." Harry smiled at the short charms professor. "Well, I'm sure we can arrange a time for a few distinguished guests to come visit Hogwarts and inspect your sword, Harry." Dumbledore nodded with a grandfatherly smile. "Thank you very much, Headmaster." Harry gave a short bow to the old man. Dumbledore waved off his thanks with a chuckle. Harry quickly walked back to Penny and his study buddies. He chuckles at the shocked forms of Hermione, Mandy and Padma. Luna had congratulated him happily, and he'd thanked her. Penny gave him a quick kiss of congratulations before she started asking for more details about his sword. Harry could only chuckle as he started to explain. Next weekend. It was Saturday just past noon, and Harry was standing near the far edge of the Hogwarts grounds. This was as far from the castle as they could get to ensure safety. Standing with him was Dumbledore, as headmaster, Flitwick as his head of house, as well as Penny. The small group watched as 4 people were guided to them by Hagrid. The large man had waved at Harry with a smile. Harry smiled back and noticed Hagrid was wearing the gloves and scarf he'd made for him in first year. He noticed the obvious signs of wear and tear on the items, and decided to make Hagrid a new set for Christmas. Thanks to Dumbledore and Flitwick, the area they were standing in was free of December snow and pleasantly warm. The group of 4, 2 witches and 2 wizards, all smiled happily at the change in temperature when they crossed into the spelled area. With happy murmurs, the visiting artificers removed their heavier coats and cloaks. One face stood out to Harry. Considering he'd been here to examine Harry's rune safe, it wasn't surprising. Not to mention that Lorenzo was still the oldest-looking man he'd ever seen. Flamel didn't count since the man hadn't aged a day in somewhere north of 500 years. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of all of us here, I'd like to welcome you to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Dumbledore welcomed their guests, all of whom gave their thanks at the kind welcome. We're pleased to be here again, Dumbledore. Lorenzo chuckled, and the 2 old men shared a look of old friends meeting again. Though I have to say, I didn't expect Artificer Potter to have another potential artifact so soon. Do artificers take breaks? Harry questioned curiously, and all 4 of the visitors chuckled. Most do between projects, Artificer Potter. Lorenzo nodded. Even the ones that try and create artifacts back to back often take more than 2 years to make another potential artifact. Ah, but where are my manners? I should let the others introduce themselves. Happy to be here, and not in my office for a bit. The first new person spoke up. He was slightly pale and spoke with an accent. His hair was a dark brown and he had green eyes. My name is Lucas Miller. I'm an artificer that works for the Canadian Ministry of Magic. I've held the title of Artificer for 24 years and have 2 true artifacts to my name. Greetings were made, and then the next person stepped forward. Forgive me if my English is a bit rough, it's my newest language. The next member of the group spoke up. She was an older woman, not quite as old as McGonagall, but a bit older than Professor Sinistra if Harry had to guess. I'm Lucia Nunez, a freelance artificer from Argentina. I've held the title of Artificer for 20 years and have 2 true artifacts to my name. Everyone introduced themselves to the newly named woman before the last person. Another woman stepped forward. Happy to be here. The woman spoke with warm eyes and a kind smile. She was almost the epitome of grandmother in her presence and demeanor. With white hair, some wrinkles and brown eyes, she was easily the second oldest person of the group after Lorenzo. My name is Anna Kowalczyk. I am an artificer from Poland. I've held the title of Artificer for 61 years, and have 4 true artifacts to my name. Dumbledore also apparently knew Anna as well, since both greeted each other as old friends. With introductions out of the way, the 4 visiting artificers gathered around to examine Harry's sword. Harry unsheathed the blade and held it out to them. Feel free to touch the blade, it can't cut anything physical. Harry spoke up and all 4 artificers looked at him quizzically for a moment. Harry looked back at them for a few seconds before explaining. It only cuts magic, so physical objects can't be cut. With murmurs of curiosity, all 4 artificers looked the sword over. Is this sword blood-bound, Artificer Potter? Anna questioned a few moments later. I can tell it is magical, but I feel nothing when I pour my magic into it. Yes, Artificer Kowalczyk, it is bound to my bloodline already, Harry confirmed. I'll have to demonstrate its full capabilities myself. Perfectly all right, Artificer Potter, wouldn't be the first time I've seen that. Lucas chuckled as he looked over the blade. You say this cuts magic, but how do you mean? Lucia asked curiously as she turned to face Harry. It might be easier to show you, Harry replied as he took the sword back and conjured a fireball to hang in the air. Touching the blade to the fire snuffed it out instantly. It's like that. All 4 artificers nodded in understanding before they drew their own wands. Harry handed the sword back to them and watched on as they tried to bombard it with spells of all kinds. Not a single spell could even touch the sword without dispersing. Well, it most certainly does what you say. Lorenzo looked flummoxed. Spells can't even touch it. Ain't just leaves the physical tests." Lucas smiled as he picked up the sword. "Apologies in advance in case it breaks, Artificer Potter." The Canadian wizard bowed slightly. Harry nodded back. He was confident in his artifact sword. "These rocks should do." Lucas nodded to some large rocks and boulders off to the side. He hefted the sword up and brought it down on the rock closest to him with all his strength. There was the sharp clang of metal on stone, and then Lucas was bringing the blade up to his eyes to inspect. "Well made, Artificer Potter," he smiled. "Not a ding, crack, or even scratch on it. Don't be so gentle." Lucia smiled as she waved her wand and levitated a larger boulder. "Bon, we must be thorough." Lucas laid Harry's sword on the rock he'd hit with it and backed away. Lucia dropped the boulder, and the giant rock smashed the sword in the rock it laid on. A few moments to clear the large cracked pieces away, and Lucia whistled. She pulled the sword from the rubble and showed the dusty blade still perfectly intact. "Very impressive, Artificer Potter, very impressive." "Thank you, Artificer Nunez." Harry smiled at the woman. The four artificers conversed for a bit over the tests, and after a minute or so seemed to come to an agreement. The four approached and handed Harry the sword. Harry accepted it back and wiped off the dust with the edge of his robes. Penny gave him a look for the action, but Harry just grinned. "It is most definitely an artifact, Artificer Potter." Lorenzo smiled at the teen. "But until we see its full capabilities, we cannot determine its grade. Allow me and my lovely assistant to demonstrate then." Harry motioned to Penny, who rolled her eyes playfully at him, and the two began a similar demonstration to the one that Dumbledore, Flitwick, and his study buddies had seen. "This is full power," Harry informed the Artificer panel as he held the sword over his head. The blade began to spark with electricity as Harry channeled the Fullman curse through the sword. With a helm splitter swing, the massive blast of lightning carved through the ground and shattered the largest boulder in the area. Only pebbles remained of the once massive rock. The artificers all stared wide-eyed at what a 13-year-old had done. Harry didn't even look winded, like he hadn't even tried to put any extra power behind the spell. If that was almost entirely the sword, then it far exceeded a minor grade. Even a median grade wasn't enough. A few moments of hushed conversation followed the demonstration. The artificers all seemed to come to an agreement and walked over with shock on their faces, though they all appeared to be pleasantly shocked at the very least. "Well, Artificer Potter, it seems we were right to expect great things from you. Your artifact sword is clearly far more than any minor grade artifact." Lorenzo congratulated the teen. "And we've all reached the same thought." Here the other three artificers nodded to Lorenzo. "Your artifact sword is of greater grade. You've done what many artificers spend their entire careers attempting. Quite the remarkable young man you are, eh?" "Thank you, Master Trevisan." Harry thanked the very old artificer. He really just hadn't processed that he'd skipped a grade entirely yet. He was sure he'd freak out in short order once that fully processed. "Do you have a name for your sword, Artificer Potter?" Lorenzo questioned the young man. "Yeah, someone important to me helped come up with it." Harry smiled at Penny, who faintly blushed as she returned his gaze. "Ethereum, Conceither, the magical or higher sphere in alchemy, and many other magical practices. As a sword that can't cut physical materials, only magic, it does seem appropriate," Anna remarked with a smile. "Very well. I'll have it logged for addition into the next reprinting of the Tome of Artifacts." Lorenzo chuckled. "Congratulations on your second true artifact, Artificer Potter. Now I'm very curious as to what you'll make next," the old man laughed. Harry thanked the four artificers for their time. He figured this would be in the papers soon enough, probably after Christmas depending on the speed at which the story spread. But he'd just deal with it as it came. Penny pulled him into a hug as the group walked back towards the castle together. Harry happily returned it, and looked forward to the Yule break, and returning to Wood End Cottage. Which reminded him, he'd need to mirror call Sirius about this. Harry was sure his godfather would be over the moon for him. Current mana levels: Harry, 5,726 Tonks, 7,158 Penelope, 6,122 Fleur, 6,582. Chapter 25, Yule Break. Next project. Harry smiled as he and Penny rode the Hogwarts Express back to London. He had completed his artifact sword after 2 years of work. It was even a greater grade artifact. At 13 he'd done what many artificers spent their careers attempting. He felt a bit of pride about that. Now he was headed back to Wood End Cottage for the break. Sirius was apparently pulling out all the stops for the celebrations this year, both to celebrate Harry's achievement, and just because he was serious and he enjoyed the festivities. "What are you smiling about, Penny asked as they leaned against each other. "Why wouldn't I smile when I have such a beautiful, intelligent, loving woman cuddled up with me?" Harry grinned at the blonde. Did you learn that line from Sirius, perchance? Penny giggled softly as they held each other. No, that's how I really feel. Harry hugged her closer and Penny kissed his cheek. We do have the compartment to ourselves this time, Penny teased. Maybe we can give each other an early present? Really now? Harry looked at the head girl with a teasing glance. Whatever could you be considering? And hush and kiss me. Penny smiled. She pointed her finger at the door. The lock clicked into place and the blinds rolled down all the way. Love you, Penny, Harry murmured to her before their lips met. Penny moaned lightly as they kissed. Love you too. Penny smiled beautifully at him as she pulled back for a moment. Their lips met again and the two let themselves get lost in the feelings. Penny let Harry's hands wander and explore her body, while her own hands ghosted through his hair or ran up and down his chest. The two spent the rest of the train ride in each other's embrace. Shortly before they arrived at the station, the two separated and fixed themselves up. Penny pulled her bra back into place and rebuttoned her shirt. A quick charm on her hair saw it looking far less frazzled than it had been a second ago. Harry cast the same charm on his hair, though with the Potter hair it wasn't all that different. He fixed up his clothes. Penny's hands had done their own wandering. And the two looked each other over to make sure they were presentable. We should spend all of the train rides like that. Harry smiled and chuckled. Oh, we'll see, Penny teased as she kissed his cheek. When the train stopped and students began to disembark, the couple unlocked the door to the compartment and headed out. They left the train and looked around the platform for a moment. Sirius was easy to spot. His godfather had on a festive pointed hat that looked like a Christmas tree. It was even lit up with multicolored lights. Well, at least he toned it down a bit this time. Harry shook his head fondly. Penny giggled as she saw her father standing near Sirius, but also just far enough away to not be instantly associated with the Lord Black. Harry and Penny approached them with smiles and were pulled into hugs by their respective parent. Greetings were exchanged between Harry and Edward, while Penny and Sirius greeted each other as well. Are you keeping my godson out of trouble, head girl Clearwater? Sirius chuckled while Harry stared at him deadpan. As much as possible, Sirius. Penny smiled with a pretty laugh. Sigh, don't get into trouble. Harry tisked at his godfather. Then Penny's doing an excellent job, Sirius chortled at his godson's expense. Ha ha ha. Harry gave his most sarcastic of laughs. This got a chuckle from Edward and Penny was giggling. Plans were made for Penny to visit over the break and for some time on Christmas Day. The two pairs parted ways after that, Penny giving Harry a peck on the cheek before they left. Wood End Cottage. Being back home at Wood End Cottage was nice. The warmth that existed here always brought a smile to Harry's face. Harry happily accepted a snack from Taylor and enjoyed time with Sirius. The cottage was decked out in tons of decorations. Garlands were strung up along the walls and wrapped around the staircase banister. There were wreaths on almost every door. The tree was already set up and twinkled with multiple lights. Harry was looking at the various decorations around the living room when the fireplace flared green. From the flue came Tonks. The metamorph's eyes lit up at seeing him, and with barely a wave of her hand, the soot disappeared from her person. Harry didn't even have time to say hi before Tonks had him in a hug, and almost tackled him onto the couch. Harrikins! Tonks cheered as she snuggled her boyfriend. I missed you. So missed you too, Nim. Harry smiled as he hugged her back. The two cuddled for a moment before Tonks pulled back, then she flicked him in the forehead. Ow! Harry rubbed his forehead. What was that for? Don't nearly kill yourself making an artifact. Tonks glared at him with a pout. We want you around for life, mister. She pulled him back into her arms again. Sorry I worried you, Tonks. Harry apologized as he hugged her close. The two held each other for a bit longer before pulling away. Can I see it? Tonks asked with a smile. I guess. Harry adopted a thinking pose as he teased her. Come on, Harrikins, show me, show me. Tonks bounced on the couch like an excited child. Harry couldn't help but chuckle at the bubbly young woman. With a grin, he headed up to his room and retrieved the sword. Walking back downstairs, Harry saw Sirius and Tonks chatting. So I guess I'll demonstrate a bit, if you two want? Harry chuckled seeing both of them act like excited kids before they both raced for the back door. He followed at a slightly more sedate pace. His knowing smirk as he slowly approached the excited pair only made them insist he hurry up. Alright, back up a bit though. If you want to see full power at the end, you don't want to be too close. Sirius and Tonks took a couple steps backwards, both still excited to see Harry's artifact sword. Harry unsheathed the sword and let Tonks and Sirius look at it. It looks kinda plain, Harrikins, Tonks commented as she looked over the hand and a half broadsword. It wasn't ornate or overtly magical to her eyes. Most wizards and witches went out of their way to make things obviously magical. It doesn't need to scream, "Look at me, I'm super magical," to be an artifact, Nim. Harry grinned at her. In other words, function over looks. Sirius nodded. Still pretty boring looking there, Harry. Thanks. Harry rolled his eyes at his chuckling godfather. With the thought, Harry had a fireball snap into existence. Watch and be amazed. He chuckled as he adopted a showman's voice. He touched the blade of Ethereum to the fireball. Instantly the flames dispersed into nothing. With the first demonstration done, Harry proceeded to create different spells. Every bit of magic the blade touched dispersed. Harry even demonstrated the dispersing wave of magic on a huge fireball again. To the big one, Harry, Tonks cheered. Penny told me about it. I want to see the lightning. Do it, do it. It's all right, one full power swing then we're done. Harry laughed at his excitable girlfriend. Her hair was a brighter pink than he'd ever seen it before as she watched his demonstration. Harry channeled the Fulman curse through Ethereum, and the sword began to spark. With a swing towards the sky, a bright bolt of lightning was released. Seeing the massive bolt, both Sirius and Tonks felt their jaws drop. Harry, that was awesome! Tonks exclaimed while laughing. Oh, thank you, Nim. Harry smiled at her while sheathing Ethereum. Godson of mine, I have a slight concern. Sirius spoke up as he and Tonks approached Harry while the trio headed back inside. What's that, Sirius? Harry asked his godfather. What'll you do if someone with less than good intentions gets their hands on your sword? Sirius inquired while looking at the sheathed weapon. It's already bound to my bloodline, Harry informed Sirius, placating him. No one but me, or one of my children, can use the sword as a focus. The sheath can also protect from spells too, so it can't be summoned away from me. Plus the little surprise I worked into the handle. The teen artificer chuckled as they entered the cottage. Surprise? Tonks asked as they closed the door and warmed up. There's an intent-based ward on the handle, connected directly to Ethereum as part of the whole sword. Anyone that seeks to harm me, the Potter family, or desires Ethereum for its power, can't even touch the sword. Harry explained his final safety feature. That was a bit of arithmancy work to write out those specific conditions into the ward. Harry felt the work had been worth it though. Now no one that wished to harm him or his family could possess the sword. Even members of his future family that might desire Ethereum to use its power for themselves wouldn't be able to hold the sword. It would hopefully be enough to keep it out of less than noble hands. That's actually pretty good security, Harry. Tonks smiled at him. Indeed, Sirius nodded with a grin. Just one last concern then. Harry looked confused, and Sirius placed his hand on his godson's shoulder. Do you actually know how to use a sword, unlike formal lessons? Harry shook his head. Then we'll get you a teacher, Sirius stated firmly. Ethereum might not be able to cut anything physical, but it's still a sword and should be treated as such. Even though it's an amazing focus, it's not a wand and shouldn't be waved around as such. I had considered trying to learn at least the basics of swordsmanship, Harry mused as the trio sat in the living room together. Alright then, let's do it. I can dedicate some time this summer to learning. Good, Sirius smiled at him. Besides, I highly doubt this will be the last artifact sword you'll make. True enough, Harry smiled back. Why would you make another one? Tonks tilted her head curiously. Because magic swords are cool. Harry and Sirius responded in unison while looking at Tonks with wide grins. I can't really argue with you, I guess. Tonks cracked up laughing. Tonks stayed over for the evening. After dinner, she'd followed Harry up to his room and proceeded to kiss him. Harry wasn't complaining. The two ended up having a repeat of their negotiation meeting on Harry's bed. That night, Tonks slipped into Harry's room again and slept next to her boyfriend. Both were in pajamas, of course, but they happily held each other close and snuggled together under the warm blankets. They both had good, restful sleep that night and awoke with smiles on their faces the next morning. Christmas, Harry and family had a wonderful holiday. Gifts were exchanged and Fleur even came over for a few hours to exchange gifts. She also gave him an in-person repeat of the letter she'd sent him about harming himself in pursuit of artifact creation. Harry had accepted her reprimand, apologized for worrying her, and then accepted the warm hug she gave him. Before Fleur had to leave, she was pulled aside by Tonks and Penny. The three girls disappeared for a bit and Harry, having a good idea of what was going on, left to go find the three. If this is going to become a holiday tradition, I'm the luckiest bloke on earth, Harry thought to himself as he approached his bedroom door. He knew for a fact that it hadn't been closed earlier. Knocking on the door, Harry announced himself. Come in, Harry. Fleur purred out, and Harry felt a spark travel along his spine from her tone. Harry opened the door and quickly closed it behind him. Taking in the sight of his 3 girlfriends, all in skimpy Santa outfits, was amazing. "Like what you see?" Harry Tonks asked breathily. She was almost popping out of the small top with the size she'd made her breasts. Her generous bum was also making the short skirt struggle to cover it at all. Her thighs and legs were fully on display, as was her midriff, all capped off with the Santa hat on her head. "We hope so," Penny teased with a purr of her own. She was clearly wearing the same outfit she'd worn the last time she and Tonks had surprised him together. The lovely blonde had also not bothered to alter the outfit size with magic. Her generous bosom was just barely held by the top. Her midriff was bare, showing of her trim waist and flat stomach. The skirt was the shortest thing he'd ever seen Penny wearing before. Her thighs and legs shone off for him. "It's our gift to you." Fleur finished laying on her accent a bit thicker than normal as she teased him. Her legs and thighs showcased by an equally short skirt. Her trim waist and wide hips exposed by the low skirt and small top, said top also barely able to contain her breasts. With a giggle at his traveling gaze over their forms, all 3 young ladies turned and let him see them from the back. "Holy!" Harry breathed out as he took in the sight of 3 perfect bums presented to him. His breath hitched entirely when the tiny skirts were pulled up and green-red striped panties were revealed. 3 giggles preceded the gentle wiggling of the very nice bums, and Harry was certain he was officially the luckiest teen in magical Britain. "Harry," Tonks teased as the girls lowered their skirts and turned around. "Yes," Harry replied, still mesmerized. "Surprise." Penny giggled as all 3 tiny tops were relieved of their task of trying to contain the girls' breasts. Harry's eyes couldn't stay still. Tonks's had the largest tits he'd ever seen. Penny's boobs were just as lovely as he remembered, and she was even shaking them slightly. Fleur's breasts were just as perfect as the rest of her, as well as being natural D-cups. The teen was sure that he was in heaven. "Come here, mon amour." Fleur beckoned him close with a come-hither motion. Harry didn't remember moving, but he and Fleur were quickly wrapped in each other's arms and sharing their first kiss together. She guided him to the bed, and the kissing became deep and heated. Their tongues met, and Fleur happily showed him how the French kissed. Harry was steadily overwhelmed by his Vila girlfriend, and ended up lying on his back with his hands on her bum while they made out. "So naughty," Tonks teased as Harry and Fleur continued to make out. "Like you have room to talk." Penny giggled at the metamorph. Fleur and Harry separated with a gasp, and the Vila teen smiled lovingly down at her boyfriend. Harry was able to sit up before his lips were captured by Penny's. The two shared a deep kiss for a bit. When they separated, it was Tonks's turn, and she gently pulled Harry's lips to hers. The two kissed gently at first, before Tonks deepened it. A few moments later they separated for air. Now Harry knew he was in heaven. Your dazed look is very cute, Harry. We need you to head back downstairs so that we can change." Tonks chuckled. Penny and Fleur matched her with giggles of their own, as the 3 of them helped Harry to his feet. "Right, okay." Harry's grin wouldn't fade for quite a while. He left his room still in a happy daze and headed for the kitchen to get a drink. Fleur left shortly afterwards to spend the rest of Christmas with her family in France. Penny likewise needed to leave not long after to go to her family's Christmas dinner. The rest of the family, Sirius, Harry, Tonks, Andromeda, Ted, and Lupin, had a wonderful dinner together. Taylor had really outdone herself, and the house elf had been praised so much, Harry wasn't sure she'd ever stop smiling. Lupin was corralled into staying the night by Sirius, and Tonks pecked Harry's lips before she left. Harry went to bed with a smile on his face. December, Harry was happily working in his smithy at Wood End Cottage. He was poring over a book about leatherworking to learn the skill. He wanted to turn the rolls upon rolls of processed hide into vests, coats, and cloaks for his family. If he could get Tonks, Penny's, and Fleur's measurements, maybe 3 pairs of leather pants too, for reasons. Alright, so measure out the length, then the width. Sleeves need to be measured by diameter. Harry read over the tome as he performed the tasks listed. Bit by bit, the young artificer made progress. Near the end of the day he smiled happily at his first piece. A basilisk leather vest with cotton lining. It had very good spell resistance and it looked nice too. Harry wasn't a tailor or anything, but a vest was fairly simple all things considered. Sewing was a skill of his that he tried not to let fade. I hope Hagrid liked his new scarf and gloves. Harry smiled at the thought of the large man. He'd received a gift via owl from Hagrid again this year. Knowing his enchanting would require materials, Hagrid had sent him a book about safely harvesting parts from magical creatures. The book was all about harvesting parts that the creature could grow back. It had a heavy focus on keeping said creatures alive throughout the process too. Happy with his work, Harry took the vest and left the smithy. Walking through the cleared path in the backyard, Harry admired the snowfall. It was chilly of course, but he very much enjoyed the view of Wood End Cottage in winter. Walking into the cottage, Harry smiled when he heard a voice that had become a bit familiar over the last year. He headed into the living room, and was happy to see Sirius and Marley Reed chatting and enjoying tea. The two were rather serious at this point in their relationship. Harry was expecting for Sirius to eventually announce their engagement. "What's up, Harry?" Sirius asked as he looked at his godson with a smile. "Finished the first basilisk leather vest," Harry explained as he held up the vest. "So I figured you could model your last Christmas present for Marley." "For me?" Sirius stood up and took the vest from Harry. "Thank you, Harry." He smiled as he put the vest on. Buttoning up the 3 buttons, he moved his arms a bit and found the vest to fit fairly well. "I guess the measurements were good then." He chuckled as Harry had taken his measurements before Christmas Day. "Looks like it." Harry nodded to his godfather. "Now for the big test." Sirius grinned and gave Harry a wink. "What do you think, love?" he asked while turning to face Marley. The ravenette woman with the warm gray eyes smiled at her lover. "It looks rather dashing on you, Sirius." Marley grinned. "I rather like it." "Content, well, that settles it." Sirius clapped his hands together. "Made by my godson and approved by my darling, I'm sold," he chuckled as he ran his hands over the vest. Marley let out a warm laughter that made Sirius smile, and Harry grinned at his godfather. "It's also very spell resistant too, so it'll protect you if anything untoward should happen," Harry informed him. "I hit it with everything from a stinging hex to a severing curse, and none of them left a mark on it." "You don't say?" Sirius looked the vest over with wide eyes. "The buttons will take in mana if you apply it to them like you would a wand," Harry showed Sirius. "Tin leather retains the basilisk's magic resistance, but it'll fade away in time. Giving it mana from time to time will keep it from fading for quite a while longer. You could probably keep it for the rest of your life. But I kinda doubt it'll still be working after that long, so it's not something that can be passed down. Also, it's only magic resistant, so it won't stop physical objects like blades, rocks, or what have you. Only the basilisk scales are both magic resistant and physically resistant," he explained, and Sirius pulled him into a hug. "Thank you, Harry." Sirius squeezed him tight for a moment. "Ain't I love it?" No problem, Sirius. Give me some time to practice more, and I'll have a long coat for you too," Harry whispered back as he returned the hug. Take your time, Harry." Sirius chuckled. "Make a vest for yourself first. I don't want anything to happen to you." "Sure thing." Harry grinned at his godfather. "This is so heartwarming." Marley cooed at the scene. "Oh, you're an excellent parent, Sirius." The smile Marley gave him made Sirius's heart thump in his chest. "Well, I'll just be in my smithy working. Probably won't be back inside for a few hours," Harry announced as he walked out of the living room and towards the back door. "Boy!" Sirius called after him. Harry burst into laughter as he closed the back door behind him. He hurried back to his smithy just in case Sirius and Marley really did decide to take advantage of his absence. "Now, how do I craft armor?" Harry asked a few books he'd set aside while practicing his leatherworking. The 4 tomes were heavy leather-bound books, and should have most everything Harry needed to know about crafting armor within them. Some trial and error with iron should get him the basics down. Then, it was only a matter of learning how to apply the basilisk scales to the creation process. He was certain his translated creaturecraft journal had a section involving shields and armor. Basilisk scale mail sounds kinda cool. Harry chuckled to himself. He wrote a quick note on a spare piece of parchment to get his own measurements as well as tonks, pennies, and fleurs, so he could make each of them a basilisk leather vest. Harry didn't think anything was out to get him at the moment, but that diary of Voldemort's had proven the mad wizard still had ways to cause trouble. Plus, he still remembered what Hagrid had said about the dark wizard. "Some say he died, Codswallop, in my opinion." "Nope, I'm sure he's still out there somewhere. Too tired to carry on. But better safe than sorry." Harry nodded to himself as he picked up the first tome. "Albania, yes, you've actually done well, Flint." Voldemort chuckled darkly at his only servant. "Thank you, my lord." Stephen Flint trembled from his kneeling position. "Ain blood, dragon blood, salamander blood, all 3 are finally in my possession," Voldemort hissed as he held up the small bottles of each. "Strengthening solution, blood replenishing potion, everlasting elixirs, and the potion of all potential. Yes, this will take some time, but soon enough I'll be free of these squibs. Free to slowly recover in a homunculus body, and once I have that it will be merely a matter of time," the dark wizard hissed out. About that, my lord?" Stephen trembled out. "Sigh, I haven't yet been able to find any thaumaturgia in any apothecary." "Then why are you still here?" Voldemort turned his hate-filled red eyes on his terrified servant. "Get out and find it." Stephen tripped and stumbled over himself in terror as he scrambled away from Voldemort. The telltale crack of apparition followed not long after. "Worthless fool," he hissed out. There was no time to deal with him yet. He had potions and elixirs to brew with what he did have. The base ingredient for the homunculus body he would craft was the cremated ashes of 7 wizards. A dark smirk pulled at the lips of his current host body. Voldemort had plenty of experience with burning the corpses of those foolish enough to get in his way. Once the body was crafted, he'd possess it, and then, the powerful potions and elixirs he would brew would come into play. "Soon, I'll be able to use a wand again," Voldemort intoned. "I'll need to be careful as I regain my lost magic. While I'm still weakened like this, I can't yet call upon those who are beholden to me." A hissing from nearby caught Voldemort's attention. "Ah, Nagini, I trust you had a good hunt." The large snake hissed back at him, and Voldemort could only grin. "Yes, once he is no longer useful, you may have him." A malicious chuckling filled the small warded stone cottage. Current mana levels Harry, Tonks, Penelope, Fleur. Chapter 26, Patronus and Animagus upgrades. Harry groaned as he left potions and headed out of the dungeons. One would think that after more than 2 years of being a right prick, that Snape would give it a rest. Apparently the greasy potions professor wouldn't be doing that. Even producing flawless potions only got Harry acceptable or on rare occasions and exceeds expectations in the class. As it stood, Harry had no chance of proceeding to the NEWT classes come 6th year. Though to be perfectly honest, Harry didn't much care. Potions simply didn't interest him as much as other branches of magic. Harry was beginning to wonder if staying for the full 7-year course would be worth it. "Ah, Harry, good to see you." Remus smiled at the teen. It was time for another of their after-class practice sessions. "Are you ready to try the Patronus charm again?" Oh. Yeah, I think I have a powerful happy memory now." Harry nodded as the two headed into the empty defense against the dark arts classroom. "Well, that's a step in the right direction," Remus encouraged his surrogate nephew with a smile. "Whenever you're ready, Harry." "Time to write." Harry pulled out his holly and phoenix feather wand and recalled the joy he felt when being with his girlfriends over the Yule break. The love they held for each other, the affection they shared, the gifts he'd been given by them. Harry's heart felt warm just recalling the memories they'd made together. With these memories at the forefront of his mind, Harry cast the charm. Expecto Patronum. From the tip of Harry's wand, a bright silvery white form emerged. It twisted and twined through the air with a serpentine body. The length and size of the Patronus was impressive for a first-time corporeal cast. The guardian that Harry had conjured was easily 5 meters long. For a moment, Remus thought Harry's Patronus was a snake of some kind. Only when the guardian stopped twisting and moving through the air did Remus and Harry get a good look at it. "My word," Remus breathed out as he looked at Harry's Patronus. The silvery white guardian was no snake. It was an eastern dragon. A long, sinuous body, 4 limbs with 5 toes bearing claws. 2 long whiskers came from its snout. It sported a pair of antler-like horns, and down its long back was a line of glowing white fur. "I did it!" Harry breathed out happily as he saw his corporeal Patronus for the first time. "Isn't it uncommon to have a magical creature as your Patronus?" "Indeed, Harry, rather rare to be sure," Remus confirmed with the teen. "Now that I can cast it with my wand, I can work on mastering it wandlessly." Harry smiled as he released the charm and the guardian faded into silvery mist before disappearing entirely. "That may be far more difficult than even learning the charm itself," Remus mused, and Harry shrugged. "I don't like to leave spells unmastered," Harry stated simply. "Also, have you given any thought to helping Sirius and I with the Animagus transformation? And why did Sirius put that idea in your head?" Remus sighed while pinching the bridge of his nose. "Because it's a very useful bit of magic," Harry reminded his surrogate uncle. "And also because he's Sirius, and he did it while in Hogwarts, so he thinks I should too." "Right, of course," Remus chuckled as he shook his head. "I'll explain the process, Harry. But know that it is very advanced magic that requires a long time to make work. If any step is skipped, missed, or forgotten, you'll have to start over from the very beginning again. Sirius said it took him and my dad almost 3 years to get it right." Harry recalled, and Remus confirmed that it did. "The process is extremely difficult and can result in disaster." Remus began the explanation. There have been cases such as permanent half-human half-animal mutations if the process is done incorrectly. To begin, you have to keep a single mandrake leaf in your mouth for an entire month, from one full moon to the next full moon. So a full lunar month is required. Even a mandrake leaf should dissolve from saliva in that amount of time, shouldn't it? Harry questioned curiously. Mandrake leaves aren't broken down so easily. Remus shook his head. They usually require physical processing to break them down for potion making. Huh. We only went over their care in herbology, so I guess Snape just decided not to teach us that. Harry sighed at what a crap teacher Snape was to students that didn't have a talent or excessive knowledge of potions. Continuing on, if the leaf is removed or swallowed, the witch or wizard will have to start over again. During the next visible full moon, visible is very literal here, so if the night happens to be cloudy, the one attempting the process will have to start over. Harry's eyes widened at having to rely on the weather to be a certain way for this process to work. But if the weather is proper, then the one attempting the process has to spit the leaf in a phial while under the moon's pure rays. To the moon-struck phial, the wizard or witch must add one of their own hairs, a silver teaspoon of dew that has not seen sunlight or been touched by human feet for 7 full days, and the chrysalis of a death's head hawk moth. The mixture has to then be put in a quiet, dark place, and can't be disturbed in any way. Remus's had to hold back a chuckle at Harry's incredulous look. Why is this so obscure? Who came up with this specific method? Harry felt like scratching his head in frustration. Trust magic to be as weird and specific as it wants to be, while other times it was simple and straightforward. The next step that has to happen is for the one attempting to wait for an electrical storm, whenever that might be. During this waiting period, the attempter will have to, at both sunrise and sunset without fail, chant the incantation, Amato Animo Animato Animagus, with the tip of their wand placed over the heart. When next there is a lightning storm, the attempter will need to move immediately to a large and secure place, recite the incantation one final time, and then drink the potion. Remus couldn't stop the snicker that came as he saw Harry's incredulous look. Oh, are you making that up? Harry questioned as he looked at Remus for any signs he was being pranked. That sounds like you're making it up. Unfortunately not, Harry. Remus held up his hands. That's the only available method that is guaranteed to work. That is, unless you want to transfer to Ouagadougou down in Africa. They specialize in self-transfiguration. In fact, a good number of their students are animagus before they graduate. Well, I have been pondering on if it would be worthwhile to attend Hogwarts for all 7 years recently, Harry admitted, and Remus face-palmed at his words. You're very advanced for your age, Harry, to be sure. Remus agreed. So you can take your OWLs and even NEWTs at the ministry early, but if you fail, you'll have to stay at Hogwarts all 7 years to be given a chance to attempt them again. I'd just go for the core classes along with runes and arithmancy for OWLs, and then focus on charms, data, runes, arithmancy, and maybe transfiguration for NEWTs if I did that. Harry shrugged. He knew he could easily pass any practical exam for OWLs, and possibly even NEWTs when it came to spellcasting or rune work. Let's shelve that conversation for later then, Remus suggested, and Harry agreed. Now, let's see you cast the Patronus again. Si expecto patronum. Harry cast and his guardian emerged from the tip of his wand again. This time, Harry poured more of his mana into the spell. His Patronus reflected this by being 8 meters long this time. The silvery white Eastern dragon flew through the air in large circular motions around the classroom. Very good, Harry. Very good indeed. Remus smiled at the progress. As an interesting little side note to our animagus discussion, the few witches and wizards that have been known as animagus, and capable of casting a corporeal Patronus as well, often have similar forms. I assume there aren't many examples of this, based on how difficult each one is to accomplish. Harry inquired, as he let his Patronus disperse. There are very few indeed, Remus nodded to Harry. Professor McGonagall is capable of both, however, and both her animagus form and her Patronus take the form of a cat. Does that mean I'll turn into a dragon animagus if I complete the process? Harry questioned curiously. Being a dragon animagus would be pretty cool, and we wouldn't know until you transformed for the first time, Remus informed him. It's debated as to whether or not an animagus can be a magical creature, but most seem to think it should be possible, even though it's never been seen before. Even powerful witches and wizards that have become animagus often have mundane forms. If history is accurate, even Morgana Le Fay was only a bird animagus. Huh, that's interesting, Harry mumbled as he wondered if his Patronus would be the same as his animagus form. Professor McGonagall might be a good basis to go off of for now. It would be cool to be a dragon, Harry thought to himself with a grin. The weekend Saturday. All right, I got some experience forming armor over the Yule break, Harry mused as he looked over his stores of materials and his tools in his hidden workshop. I got some more experience with creature craft too. He remembered making a few more basilisk hide vests for himself, Tonks, Penny, and Fleur. He also vividly remembered the thanks he'd gotten from his girlfriends for the gift. A dopey grin made its way onto his face without restraint. Tonks had been very thankful after all. She now wore her vest under her aura robes as added protection. The bubbly metamorph had jokingly complained about the dull color though. The hide was too magic resistant for any type of color-changing charm to affect it though, so she was stuck with the dull black-green color. There has to be a better way, a more efficient way to craft an artifact without almost killing myself though, Harry thought aloud as he looked at his materials and tools again. And creature craft with conquered materials comes out easier. So maybe that is what I should look into. Thinking on it some more, the teen artificer paced back and forth as he went over ideas. It wasn't like he had to one-up himself with every artifact he made. In fact, he'd skipped a grade with Ethereum, so maybe a median grade artifact should be his next goal? That still left the problem of crafting an artifact without bringing himself to the brink of death like last time. His materials were fine. He could transmute his base materials into alchemic magical metals with consistent success nowadays. He was slowly increasing his skill with alchemy as well. But if he ever wanted to transmute his own orichalcum or adamantite, then he needed to be at least proficient in that branch of magic. Maybe his tools needed an upgrade? Looking over his blacksmithing tools, he examined them. They were made of steel and were sturdy. Nothing was special or magical about them. They were just good workman's tools. Maybe he could change that though? Could he magically strengthen his current tools? Or could he create his own tools with magical properties that would enhance his crafting? Well, only one way to find out. Harry grinned to himself as he pulled out a few rune books and his creature craft journal. Over the next few hours, Harry used his rune etching kit to apply a minor runic array to his various hammers and tools. He'd even gone to the trouble of applying a static runic array to his anvil. Now all he had to do was take the next step in his alchemy attempts. A compound transmutation, taking two or more alchemic metals and transmuting them together into a new magical metal. Harry had never done it before, and he'd have to draw the transmutation circle himself. The pre-prepared transmutation circle plates that had come with his alchemy kit weren't complex enough for this type of transmutation. Looking through the most advanced alchemy book he had in his workshop, Harry noted the various formulas that he'd need to draw into his transmutation circle. Alchemy was quite the strict branch of magic. Harry had failed enough times to know that, but he'd keep trying as many times as necessary to get it right. Hard work and practice were the name of the game, and Harry had been playing for years now. Sunday morning hidden workshop? Alright, the inner circle is complete. Now the outer circle is a hexagon base. Harry was muttering to himself as he checked his advanced alchemy book and his own notes to make sure he was drawing the transmutation circle properly. So what are you trying to make with this? Penny asked as she looked over what Harry was drawing onto the stone floor. The transmutation circle wasn't overly large, maybe a meter in diameter. The lines on it were perfectly straight, and Harry had used a taunt string to make the perfect circle in the center. Now her boyfriend was making a perfect hexagon with a meter stick around the perfect circle. Zeklatite, Harry answered without taking his eyes off his drawing. And that is? Penny asked leadingly a moment later. A magical metal that has a high magic conductivity and transference as well as a very high heat resistance. It's also very durable to blunt force, more so than most non-magical metals. Harry smiled at her as he finished the hexagon. I'm planning to use it as the basis for the runes I've etched into my tools. One if it has high heat resistance. Then how are you going to melt it to fill in the runes? Penny questioned, as Harry set up the string and pole he was using to draw perfect circles. With magic, of course. Harry grinned at her before he made sure the string was the proper length and then made it taut. He used the string to draw another perfect circle around the hexagon, and then removed the pole and string. There we go. I should be able to use this a few times before I'll need to redraw it. Since you don't think it'll work the first time? Penny teased her boyfriend. I've never done a compound transmutation before, so I'm half expecting to fail, Harry admitted with a shrug. Penny kissed his cheek. Or for luck. Penny smiled at him. Harry hugged her before she stepped back and he went to get his materials. He gathered ingots of ulm and sylvan and weighed them each one by one. If he wanted this compound transmutation to have any chance of working, then his materials had to be the proper amount by weight. When he had the ingots weighed, he then turned to the ingots he'd added to his collection. Though to be honest, all he'd done was let Vitrisari cool and solidify. The golden ingots were all weighed separately, and Harry noted their weights. Alright then. So these 3 Sylvan ingots, these 2 Vitris Auri ingots, and this 1 Ulm ingot. Harry spoke as he gathered up the proper ingots and then carefully, so he didn't mess up his transmutation circle, placed them inside the perfect circle in the center. Stepping back just as carefully, Harry gave a bright smile to Penny as he kneeled down and placed his hands flat on the floor. With only the tips of his middle digits making actual contact with the transmutation circle, Harry poured his mana into the array. The array slowly lit up in a bright blue light. Small sparks jumped from the circle to the 3 metals. All 3 of the magical metals began to glow with their own magic in response. The Sylvan glowed a white color, Ulm an orange color, and Vitris Auri a yellow color as the transmutation began. The ingots began to fuse together into one as Harry fed more of his mana into the circle. Once all 3 glowing ingots fused together, the glow became brighter, as the 3 colors blended together in a tri-colored rainbow. Then the 3 colors merged together, and a new color emerged. The resulting color was a slate gray as the new metal formed in the magic sparks of the transmutation circle. Harry felt some kickback from the circle and stopped pouring his mana into it. The blue glow faded away and the lines returned to their previous chalk white. The slate gray glow persisted for a bit before fading to reveal the new material. Did it work? Penny asked, as she looked at the fairly large ingot that had been formed from the 6 previous ingots. I'll have to check, Harry replied as he carefully removed his creation. He still didn't want to mess up the circle in case he'd failed, and he needed to use it again. Looking over the new metal, he didn't see any lines or striations that would have formed from a failed transmutation. That was a good sign already. As he examined the ingot for any malformations or discoloration, his hope began to grow. Taking a small hammer, Harry held the ingot in his left hand, and then lightly struck it. The sound was clear, a good solid sound. That meant the metal was uniform. He tapped it a few more times in various spots, listening for any differences in tone. Placing the hammer down on his work table, Harry fed some mana into the ingot. It glows? Penny tilted her head as the ingot glowed with the slate gray color again. It glows. Harry nodded with a large smile breaking out across his face. And it worked! It's Zeklatite! He cheered at his success. He was fairly certain his first compound transmutation was going to fail. And now I just have to get it hot enough to melt and use it for the rune base. So how are you going to do that? Exactly? Penny asked, and when Harry smiled at her she cut him off. Don't say magic. Fine, Harry pouted as his girlfriend stopped his gag. Remember how I said Zeklatite had high magical conductivity and transference? Penny nodded to him. Well, I'm going to basically cast a fire spell into the Zeklatite until I hit its melting point. Once it's that hot it'll take a bit for it to cool down. If I had a lovely assistant to help me with keeping it hot, I'll be able to fill in the runic arrays and upgrade my tools. He smiled at her, and Penny shook her head with a giggle. Of course I'll help, Penny agreed easily. Better that than you trying to do it all yourself. Indeed, Harry nodded sagely. A ball of mana popped against his head and he chuckled. The two set up a vessel for the molten Zeklatite to fill and set the ingot inside it. Okay, here I go. Penny held out her hand towards the Zeklatite and focused. She was using her mana to cast a fireball. She'd done it plenty of times before. The only difference this time was where she was forming and gathering the heat. The blonde narrowed her brown eyes as she focused more of her mana into her spell. She needed more power, more heat, and she needed to maintain that heat for long enough that Harry could fill the runic arrays of his tools. There we go. You're doing great, Penny, Harry encouraged his girlfriend with a bright grin. The Zeklatite was slowly turning red. After a minute it was a bright orange. Penny and Harry began to sweat as the temperature of the magical metal continued to rise. Finally the metal softened and deformed. The ingot began to lose shape and became a pool of molten metal in the vessel. Harry beamed at Penny for her assistance as he filled his alchemic pen with the molten Zeklatite. Wine, take your time, no rush, Penny joked as she focused on keeping the metal molten hot. Harry chuckled as he carefully filled in the arrays on his tools one by one. He had to refill his pen 14 times to get all of the tools finished, including his anvil. Done! You can stop, Penny, Harry informed his girlfriend as he emptied the last of the molten Zeklatite from his alchemic pen back into the vessel with the remainder. He'd used most of his ingot for this. He doubted there was enough Zeklatite left in the bottom of the vessel to make anything more than a paper weight. He'd still keep it, of course. He'd gone through the trouble of making it. Shoo! Woo! Penny panted as she ended her spell. I'm sweating. That took way more mana than I thought it would. She wiped her forehead of the droplets that were there. "You were great, love." Harry hugged her and Penny smiled happily as she returned the hug. "And all sweaty though," Penny mumbled into his ear. "So am I, it's fine," Harry assured her as he gave her a squeeze. "We could both use a shower," Penny commented as they let go of each other. "Feel free to use the one in the smithy," Harry offered with a smile. "I can do basic cleaning charms, so I'll have your clothes clean by the time you're done. And so I'll take you up on that, boyfriend of mine." Penny kissed his cheek. "So I could help wash your back if you wanted to?" Harry grinned and Penny giggled at him. "Sorry, Harry, you're not getting that far just yet." Penny shook her head. "Maybe next year." She kissed his lips and the two enjoyed a soft lip lock for several moments. "But you won't be here next year," Harry reminded her with a raised eyebrow. "Oh, you're right. I guess that's too bad." Penny chuckled as she sauntered towards the full bathroom. Harry internally cursed the Hogwarts robes for covering so much of Penny's form right now. "That's just evil." Harry trailed off as Penny dropped her robe and then unbuttoned her shirt. The head girl placed the shirt in a chair near the bathroom door and then undid her skirt. Harry drank in the sight of Penny in nothing but her bra and panties as she removed her shoes and socks. She turned to face him and removed her bra with a lusty look in her eyes. Harry's gaze quickly focused on Penny's bountiful chest. His brown-eyed girlfriend was only slightly smaller than Fleur in the breast department. Harry enjoyed the sight of Penny's bare breasts, very much indeed. With a teasing sway of her body, she disappeared into the bathroom and closed the door. A second later, the door opened a crack, and Penny's arm emerged to add her panties to the pile of clothes to be cleaned. "Thank you, love," Penny called out to him with a purr before the door closed entirely. Maybe I should offer to do the girls' laundry during the summer every now and then," Harry pondered with a grin. If that was the kind of payment he'd get, he could accept some menial chores. Harry set about cleaning Penny's sweaty clothes with spells. When he'd finished cleaning them, he folded them up and set them in a neat pile on the chair that he moved directly in front of the door. As a little teasing of his own, Harry had made sure to set Penny's bra and panties on top of her other clothes. Just to remind her that he'd seen them up close for an extended period of time, he had to get his own teasing in when he could, otherwise the girls might think they had free run. And Harry couldn't let that happen, it wouldn't be nearly as fun. "Now I need to focus on something else to deal with this." Harry looked down at his waist. If it wasn't for the Hogwarts robe, his reaction to Penny's little show would be very visible. "I guess I'll just start drawing up the next plans." Harry went over to his work table and pulled over a fresh sheet of parchment. With a grin, he drew up the shape of his tools on it. Then he started noting down what he'd make them out of. He had plenty of magical iron. The dwarves were mining plenty from the old mine, then making it magical as they processed it for use. He also had a plethora of basilisk bones. Slytherin's basilisk had been huge, and Harry wasn't one to waste such a large cache of materials. "Using my newly upgraded magic tools, I'll forge myself a set of tools from basilisk carbon steel. With magical materials forged into tools and then applied with my runic arrays on top of that, there's no telling how much this could improve my forging." Harry couldn't stop the giddy chuckling he was letting out as he drew up his plans. As long as he didn't use the basilisk's fangs for material, they shouldn't impart the lethality of the beast's venom into his tools. It would be rather dumb to have a common blacksmith tool that poisoned a person with lethal venom with but a touch after all. Current mana levels: Harry, Tonks, Penelope, Fleur, chapter, new tools, new items, new project. Harry hummed happily to himself as he looked over all of his new blacksmithing tools. He'd completed 3 sets of new tools over the last 2 weeks with Penny's help. He'd made more Zeklatite and failed twice because alchemy was a super fickle branch of magic before he'd finished. Aside from the 2 ingots of failed Zeklatite, which he'd stored away for future attempts at breakdown and separation alchemy, Harry had succeeded in his plans to forge new tools. The first set was his old steel tools, newly enhanced with his runic array and Zeklatite. Harry was certain he'd have a much easier time transferring his mana into his creations with them now. Each strike of the hammer would impart more mana, more efficiently into his forged creations. It should at least help prevent magical exhaustion to an extent. Not to mention that the more of his mana he imbued into his forging, the better his materials responded. His mana carried his intent after all. With it flowing more efficiently, it should help shape his creations the way he wanted them to be. The second set was pure basilisk carbon steel, forged into a copy of every type of tool his original set had come with. Multiple types of hammers, tongs, pliers, and chisels, all made of the inherently magical metal. With this set, Harry had foregone applying his Zeklatite-infused runic array. He wanted to know just what these magical base material tools could do all by themselves. He hypothesized that they'd provide much better results to his forging than his standard tools, since he'd not only made them by his own hand, but made them from a conquered material in the basilisk's bones. His will and intent were literally part of these tools, and by his own experience with magic, that should allow for far greater results than standard non-magical tools. The third and final set incorporated both methods of creation. Harry had forged a second set of basilisk carbon steel tools, then he'd applied his runic array and infused it with zeklotite. This set of tools was not only forged by his hand from conquered materials, but also etched with a runic array that was then infused with a magical metal that he'd transmuted himself. Aside from him adding his own lifeblood to them, this particular set of tools might as well be a physical extension of his intent and will. Harry was looking forward to testing all of them out. Now let's see, what was I the closest to completing? Harry wondered as he pulled open his notes and looked over his current projects. Right. I still need to figure out the control sequence for the mana bane chains. The flight item still can't control altitude, but the spell ward array works, and with the leftover zeklotite, I should be able to complete the next prototype. With a smile, Harry set to work. Pulling out a pair of forearm guards he'd forged from magical iron, he set about etching the spell ward array into the first one. With luck, once he infused the array with zeklotite as the base, he'd have an item that could block even fairly powerful hexes, jinxes, and curses. Anything incredibly powerful would probably burn them out, even with zeklotite-imbued runes, but if they could block a good number of moderate spells before failing, that would be another step in the right direction. Every success builds upon the next, I just have to keep learning and trying. Harry chuckled to himself as he etched the next rune in the sequence. First week of February. You want what exactly? Penny looked at her boyfriend perplexed. Dragon bones, more specifically the wing bones. Harry repeated his request. Why do you need just the wing bones? What's wrong with the rest of them? Penny inquired with a tilt of her head. I think I know why my flight item hasn't been working. Harry smiled at his girlfriend. I need not only a better material than just magical iron, but I need it to be crafted from something that has the capability of flight. So you chose dragon wing bones? Penny felt a small smile form on her lips. Exactly! Harry grinned at her. Think about it. Dragons are way too big to fly with just their wings. So a part of their innate magic must go to their ability to fly. If I forge dragon wing bones into magical iron, I can make a magical carbon steel that should possess some innate aptitude for runic arrays involving flight. The teen artificer smiled brightly, his eyes lit up with his passion for crafting and enchanting. Penny really loved seeing Harry so fired up like this. His work ethic was one of the many things that had attracted her to him in the first place. So how are you planning to get them and know for a fact that they're all wing bones? Penny curiously asked. Harry took on a thinking pose as he mulled over ideas in his head for a bit. I'd need to go to a dragon reserve, collect the bones I want as they're rendering a dragon down for parts and materials. Harry nodded to himself before looking at Penny. I might have to head back home for the Easter break this year. I'm sure Sirius wouldn't mind spending a day going on a trip with me to a dragon reserve. No, I don't suppose he would. Penny chuckled. With the way he spoils you, it's amazing you haven't become an entitled little prat. Sheech, oi! Harry flicked a mana ball at his head girlfriend. Penny only giggled as she swatted it away. Oh no, I'm not spoiled. I'm just teasing you, Harry. Penny covered her mouth to suppress her continued giggles. But he did spend a decent amount of the Black family fortune to buy the land the iron mine sits on, just so you and the dwarves could go into business together. Sirius gets a cut of the sales too. Harry looked away, refusing to admit that he might have been a little spoiled by his doting godfather. Penny continued to grin while Harry ignored the small snickers that escaped her every now and then. So, how are the other projects coming along? Penny asked a few minutes later. Harry's mood brightened as he went over to where he kept a few of his prototypes in the hidden workshop. Penny watched on as Harry strapped on a pair of metal forearm guards and then turned to face her. Hit me with a spell, Harry challenged her with a smirk. Why? Penny raised one eyebrow in response. So I can show you how these work, of course. Harry playfully rolled his eyes at her. What kind of spell? Penny questioned as she raised her hand. Whatever you like, it won't make a difference. Harry smiled deviously at the blonde. He knew how to get Penny's competitive side to make an appearance. So, really? Penny had a smirk of her own now. A sparking orange spell appeared in her raised hand. Well, since you asked for it. With that, Penny launched the crackling orange ball at Harry. She blinked in shock when Harry batted the spell aside and into the stone wall. Was that all? Harry asked cheekily, and Penny blinked at what her boyfriend had just done. How? You didn't even use a spell! Penny was confused, to say the least. I didn't see any magic use at all, in fact. What are those? Remember how I was working on the spell ward array? Harry asked innocently. Well, after I made it work for Ethereum's scabbard, I was able to apply it to magical iron with only a few changes to the overall array. These are the first successful prototypes, spell ward guards as I've taken to calling them. Penny blinked. Do spells just bounce off them? Penny blinked as she walked over to look at the prototype closer. Not so much bounce off, as they simply stop spells from activating their effects, Harry explained as Penny looked over the guards. A spell imparts its effects upon contact with a target, right? Penny nodded in agreement. What the spell ward array does, is keeping the flying spell from activating, and lets me redirect it elsewhere, like I did with yours. Hence the ward part of the name, Penny realized as she smiled at Harry. Yep, it wards off spells rather than blocking them or destroying them. Harry grinned happily at his prototypes. I was going to try and use this array on a small charm like a bracelet or locket, but it has diminishing returns based on the size of the item. The smaller the item, the weaker the effect. Unfortunately, if my arithmancy and rune theory is correct, too large of an item will also spread the spell ward too thin to be of any real use. It's quite the conundrum, but it's a non-static array, so that might be the issue in and of itself. They're still impressive, Harry, Penny assured him, as she looked the guards over a bit more. Are you going to market these to the Aurors as well? Probably not. Harry shook his head. Seeing Penny's confusion, he explained. The Auror batons are good for enforcing the law without pulling wands right off the bat. It's good for the Aurors to have an option that isn't capable of lethal force. Tonks has told me that the Auror Corps reputation has been on the rise since they made the baton standard issue. But if a baton or two fell into the wrong hands, it wouldn't be good, but it also wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen. I think I get where you're going with this. Penny looked contemplative. And a spell ward would make anyone wearing them impervious to most spells so long as they're facing them head on. If they fell into the wrong hands, then even the Aurors might not be able to deal with the wizard or witch that has them. Exactly. Harry nodded with a small smile. Letting these get out into the open market would probably make Potter and Erdun creations a fortune, but the risk of them being misused is so high that no amount of money is worth the potential problems they could bring. I agree. Just the thought of some dark wizard or witch being impervious to most spells is already making my stomach turn. Penny shook her head to rid her mind of the image. So if they work though, why are you still calling them prototypes? Because I want them to be gauntlets when they're done. Harry grinned at her. But articulated metal is hard to do. I'm still practicing it with regular iron right now. Progress is kind of slow going. I'm sure you'll learn it and master it eventually, Harry. Penny leaned in and pecked his lips. Oh, you always do. Harry smiled warmly at her as he took off the spell ward guards and placed them back on the shelf he got them from. Thank you, Penny. Harry hugged his girlfriend gently. Penny smiled as she returned the hug and even placed a kiss on top of Harry's head. What happened with your mana bane idea? Penny asked curiously as they pulled away. I haven't heard you talk about it in a bit. That's mostly worked out. Harry answered as he moved over to the work table and pulled open the locked and sealed bottom drawer. From the drawer, Harry pulled out a length of chain. It was coiled up so Penny couldn't guess at the exact length. It looked like a simple length of chain to her. And a control sequence works now, but I'd like to make it better when I can. The movements are still kind of stiff. To demonstrate, Harry held one end of the length of chain, the rest fell to the floor for a moment before seeming to float when Harry focused. It floats. Penny trailed off as she looked at the curiosity. Yeah, it floats when you know how to activate it. Harry chuckled before, with a flick of his wrist. The end of the chain he wasn't holding shot towards her. Penny yelped as the chain encircled her and then tightened its hold. Harry! Penny yelped at him. The Artificer just chuckled as Penny tried to use her magic and found she couldn't. Hey, let me go, mister. And as you can see, Harry continued as if she hadn't said anything. Once it wraps around you, you can't use your magic to form spells. The speed is decent, but the current control sequence can only do simple maneuvers. I can't make it wind around multiple targets, for instance, nor could I make it take on a certain shape and hold it, so at the moment the chains are best used for quick captures and restraint. Sencha, get it? Penny deadpanned, which made Harry chuckle. Now let me go before I start removing boyfriend privileges. The mana bane chain dropped off of her and returned to Harry. The teen Artificer wound the chain back up with a grin. Penny could at least estimate the length to be somewhere around 4 or 5 meters now. From what she knew, each link in the chain had to be etched with the continuous runic sequence from end to end for the item to work. No wonder Harry had taken so long to make a viable prototype. The work to make one Manabane chain probably took days even for a length like the prototype. Now I just need to choose something else to work on while I wait for Easter break. Harry mused as he looked around his workshop. You know that's not until April, right? Penny playfully reminded him. Yeah, it's going to be in the back of my head though. Harry shrugged. I do have something important coming up far sooner though. What's that boyfriend of mine? Penny grinned since she had a fairly good idea. I have to make sure my girlfriends have a wonderful Valentine's Day, of course. Harry confirmed her thought with a smile. That means spoiling Tonks and Fleur with gifts and taking you to Hogsmeade for a date. So I think I can agree to that. Penny giggled and Harry chuckled along with her. Chocolates and flowers for sure. Harry tapped his chin in thought. And should also make them both something they'd like. Oh? Should I also expect a handmade gift? Penny asked with a warm smile. Am I an artificer or not? Harry questioned, his hand over his chest and a smile on his lips. Of course, how could I ever forget? Penny held her cheek as she pretended to swoon. Oh, I've got a nice idea already forming in my head, Harry admitted, smiling. I think you'll all like them. Now you've got me curious. Penny chuckled at him. Mind giving me a hint? Nope, Harry shook his head. It'll be a surprise for all three of you. So are you sure? Penny cocked an eyebrow as she leaned closer. I'm sure I could convince you. Her eyes were half-lidded as she leaned in. Harry smiled as he met her halfway, and the two shared a kiss. Penny pressed herself against him, and Harry's hands found their way to her waist. The couple enjoyed the kiss for a moment before they separated. So, about the Valentine's gift, Punch'll have to wait until the day. Harry teased back as he took a step back and separated from her. It's almost time for dinner anyway. With that, Harry rushed to the workshop door and left with a laugh. Penny called after him with a pout. I guess he won this round. The fire in the head girl's eyes easily told any who would have seen them that the war was far from over. She followed after Harry at a more sedate pace. They met up at the staircase and entwined their hands as they made the walk down to the Great Hall together. Valentine's Day. Harry, it's beautiful. Penny smiled beautifully at her boyfriend as she looked at what he'd made her. It was a silver charm bracelet that had small runes on it, and 4 charms attached to it. The charms were a stylized lightning bolt, a stylized flame, a white feather, and a spiral filled with multiple colors. I'm glad you like it, Penny. Harry smiled at her. Watching her put it on, Harry waited for her to ask what it could do. She knew him well enough after all. I can see you struggling to hold back. Penny giggled at Harry's eagerness. What does it do? Harry beamed at her, and Penny couldn't hold back her chuckles. It's made mostly of Sylvan and a bit of magical iron. Harry began and then motioned to the bracelet with a grin. White also can detect harmful magic and warn you before you touch it. I got the idea from the bracelet you gave Tonks 2 Christmases ago. This is a much more powerful and longer-lasting version, handcrafted with love for you, Fleur and Tonks. He smiled fondly at Penny while she admired her gift. Love it. Penny beamed at him while pulling him into a kiss. The two shared a warm lip lock for a bit before they pulled away. Their eyes were filled with love and affection as they rested their foreheads against each other gently. Even when the warning function fades, it'll still be beautiful to wear. You've outdone yourself, love. I'll figure out how to make an artifact version if I need to. Harry grinned as they held each other close. Penny giggled into his neck as she squeezed him slightly. We still have our date in Hogsmeade to get to, Penny reminded after several minutes of them holding each other. I'm pretty content here. Harry chuckled as he squeezed her closer. And I can tell, Penny teased as she kissed his neck. But I would like to have that date. When we get back, I might have a little gift of my own for you, T.O.? Harry pulled back a bit to look his girlfriend in the eyes. Can I ask what it is? She'll find out after our date, Penny purred as she pulled back. So how did I end up dating 3 minxes at the same time? Harry playfully questioned as he stood up and they headed out of the hidden workshop. Not sure, but aren't you a lucky man? Penny teased as they closed the door behind them. Harry took her hand and they headed for the Great Hall so they could be checked off for Hogsmeade. Lucky doesn't begin to cover it. Harry returned her teasing as he pecked her cheek. Penny glowed with love and affection as she leaned into Harry. The couple made their way into the Great Hall, decorated for the holiday, and towards the line of students waiting to leave. They made it past Filch and found a carriage. Harry helped Penny into the carriage with a smile and then climbed in after her. They held each other as the carriage made its way down towards the village and enjoyed their closeness. After getting out of the carriage, the two happily interlocked their arms and walked into Hogsmeade together. They walked the length of the village, doing a little window shopping, before entering Honeyduke's on the way back. Harry bought Penny the best Honeydukes had to offer in sweets. While she didn't often show it, the head girl did have a small sweet tooth. The couple strolled through the village and popped into Gladrags to look around for a bit. When lunch rolled around, Harry and Penny went to the Three Broomsticks to eat. After a warm meal, the couple left the pub and headed back towards the carriages. It had been a wonderful few hours, and now they were ready to return. The carriage ride back was filled with kisses, and the couple indulged a bit. In short order, Penny and Harry returned to the hidden workshop for some alone time together. The head girl transfigured a chair into a plush love seat for them with a wave of her wand. Harry smiled as he kissed Penny's neck, and the blonde shivered in pleasure. Robes were dropped and hands began to explore as lips met. "Shirt," Penny mumbled as she pulled at Harry's shirt. Harry was happy to remove it as fast as his hands could move. Penny smiled as she ran her hands over his bare chest. The blacksmithing Harry did had definitely started showing on his form. Musculature had begun to develop on the Artificer, and Penny was happy to explore it. Harry hummed in pleasure as her soft hands trailed up and down his chest. "Oh, shirt," Harry teasingly whispered as he tugged on Penny's jumper. The head girl grinned naughtily as she pulled it over her head and let Harry see her bra-clad breasts again. Harry," Penny moaned lowly as Harry's hands slipped under her bra and found her nipples. The two kissed as they explored each other again. It wasn't long before Penny's bra was off completely, and Harry was lavishing attention onto her perky bosom. Harry was surprised when Penny cupped him over his pants, but only encouraged her actions with a groan. "Naughty girl." Harry breathed into the blonde's ear. "So love it," Penny purred back at him. Harry's reply was another deep kiss. Tongues came into play, and the couple moaned out their joy at increasing their closeness. "Skirt?" Harry probed as he nibbled her ear gently. Penny hummed in pleasure and with deft hands undid her skirt. The garment was removed, and Harry now held Penny in nothing but her panties. The head girl wasn't idle though. Penny kissed his lips and Harry was quick to spell off his shoes and undo his pants. She helped him get the pants off before cupping him over his boxers this time. Likewise, Harry's hands happily explored the newly exposed skin Penny had revealed. The head girl gasped as her boyfriend's hands began to fondle and play with her bum. They were completely lost in each other's touch as they furthered their relationship. "Penny," Harry hissed as Penny began to stroke him over his boxers. Harry," Penny panted as one of Harry's hands left her bum and began to move over her core and panties. She was so turned on already, and the added stimulation was incredible. Neither of the two had any real experience with this level of physical intimacy. Both were quick to show it when they reached their peaks together quickly. The two held each other tightly as they trembled in pleasure. Harry fell back against the transfigured love seat, and Penny followed him. Harry wrapped his arms around his girlfriend's waist and pulled her closer. The two cuddled in the afterglow of their moment together. "Unlove you, Penelope Clearwater," Harry told her as he held the blonde close. "I love you too, Harry Potter." Penny gave him a beautiful smile. Their lips met for a soft kiss and Harry used his magic to pull Penny's robe from the floor and cover them with it. Under their impromptu blanket, the couple cuddled and shared soft kisses. Nothing could make this moment of bliss better for them. Penny was sure of her feelings and would happily share her life with Harry. Harry was the same, knowing he'd do anything to keep his loves happy for the rest of their days together. Several minutes later, and Penny giggled lightly. Harry raised an eyebrow as he continued to gently run his hand up and down Penny's back. The head girl looked up at him with a smile before she spoke. "Can I borrow the shower again?" Penny asked with a giggle. "Sure," Harry agreed instantly. "Can I join you this time?" he asked with a teasing grin. "Nope." Penny pecked his lips as she stood up, giving Harry a look at her almost naked body again, before she gathered her clothes and sauntered off towards the smithy's shower. The sway in her hips was very much appreciated by Harry, whose eyes followed her bum until the smithy door closed and obscured his view. "Tease." Harry chuckled as he stood up from the transfigured love seat. He felt the cooled release in his boxers and grimaced. "Definitely need to clean these now." He shook his head as he gathered his clothes up and placed them on his work table. His eyes glanced over some of the plans and notes he had spread out on the surface. With a proud, if expectant grin, his eyes read over a word at the top of one of the parchments. The overall project he was hoping to complete by next school year. Current mana levels: Harry, 6,352 Tonks, 7,988 Penelope, 6,876 Fleur, 7s, 244. Chapter 28. Tonks and Fleur. Fleur was sitting in the Great Hall of Boxbaton's Academy of Magic. It was breakfast time and Valentine's Day too. The beautiful Velatine was sighing already. Several boys had already approached her trying to offer gifts in an effort to win her favor. She'd turned them all down, reminding each of them that she had a boyfriend and that their advances weren't welcomed and wouldn't be returned. Honestly, she was starting to get very annoyed at having to remind the boys of this fact. She'd had to practically announce it to get most of them to stop trying to woo her. But still, even now, there were more than a few that seemed to think they were better for her. It was with a wide smile that she beheld a trio of owls heading her way. The reason for her smile was the beautiful snowy owl leading the other two. Hedwig and her two helpers landed in front of Fleur carefully and offered her their parcels. The platinum blonde smiled brightly at Hedwig as she took the parcel the snowy owl held out to her. Opening the box, Fleur felt her heart skip a beat. She carefully removed the charm bracelet from inside and looked it over. A stylized lightning bolt, a spiral of multiple colors, a white feather, and a stylized flame hung from the bracelet. It was gorgeous, and Fleur just knew it was handmade by her boyfriend. With a bright smile, Fleur picked up the letter that was attached and opened it. She knew Harry well enough to know he'd be dying to explain what his gift could do, even in letter form. She giggled as she was proven correct and read over what her bracelet could do, and how it was made. Harry's love and affection for her was practically pouring out of the words he'd written to her. She couldn't help the happy sigh that escaped her lips. She held the letter close for a moment before she put her charm bracelet on. It truly was gorgeous. It glinted in the light and the colors of the individual charms gave it presence. Fleur almost felt like she was floating at how happy she was. There was a warmth in her heart that was only being strengthened by her and Harry's relationship. She relieved the other two owls of their parcels, both of which flew off shortly afterwards. Hedwig stayed with her and happily ate from a saucer Fleur had placed meats on. The other gifts were more standard for the holiday. Flowers, her favorite fleur-de-lis or lilies, instead of the more common red roses, as well as chocolates from honeydukes. Her boyfriend also knew her favorite type of chocolate. Oh, how could she fall even more in love with Harry? Fleur was so enamored with her love and his gifts that she didn't pay attention to the whispers of petite amie going around the boys in the great hall. Many a young man was downtrodden to know that Fleur really was in a relationship. So many fancied her for her beauty and had hoped to woo the teen. Seeing the absolute joy on her face as she accepted the gifts her boyfriend had sent her made several of the teens sigh despondently in acceptance. Quite a few would still try and woo her, far too fallen into her looks and the traces of her villa allure that she couldn't do anything about. But they were only wasting their time. They would come to learn this eventually. Well, aren't we just glowing this lovely morning? A teasing lilt came from Fleur's side as a girl sat next to her. The new arrival was also platinum blonde and had beautiful blue eyes. She had the same allure and natural beauty of Fleur as well. This was to be expected though, since this young lady was also a villa. Yes. Fleur beamed at her while she looked at Harry's gifts again. "Good morning, Chloe. How are you this wonderful day?" she asked her seventh-year friend. "Oh, very well." Chloe smiled at Fleur. She motioned to her neck slightly, and Fleur noticed the lovely necklace her friend was wearing. "Julien has spoiled me again. So I can see that." Fleur giggled as she looked at the lovely necklace inlaid with bright sapphires. "If his family wasn't so wealthy, I'd think he was trying to bankrupt them to dote on you. He's a wonderful man." Chloe smiled as she gently touched her gift. "He knows he doesn't have to spoil me like this, but he does it every Valentine's Day, every birthday, and each Christmas. Wit, humor, charms, and he is quite handsome too." She giggled along with Fleur. "How could I not fall for him? And two are wonderful together." Fleur agreed with her friend. "I could see that, even when I was only a second year. I'm almost surprised he didn't just outright propose on your 17th birthday." The two Vila shared beautiful smiles and soft chuckles. "I'm fairly certain he's still terrified of Papa." Chloe giggled and Fleur broke into a smile again. "It did scare my poor Julien when the topic of marriage came up last year." The two Vila conversed for the rest of breakfast, as was normal for them, while also petting Hedwig. The beautiful owl was admired by many of the girls of Beaux Batons. Ever since Hedwig had first started bringing letters from Harry, many of the girls had wanted to pet the snowy owl. Chloe thought she was magnificent, and Hedwig always puffed up at the praise lavished on her. "Tonks residence Valentine's Day, to you sweet boy." Tonks smiled softly at the gifts Harry had sent her. The flowers, her favorite zinnias, were lovely and vibrant, mostly purple ones, her favorite color, but with a mix of other colors as well. An assortment of sweets she was fond of from honeydukes came with them. Finally was the main gift, and as soon as Tonks opened it she beamed with fondness in her, currently purple, eyes. "You're going to spoil me rotten, Harry." She grinned as she looked at the lovely charm bracelet, easily identifying who each charm represented. The flame was Penny, the feather was Fleur, the spiral of colors was for her, and the lightning bolt was for Harry. The metamorph read the letter that came with and smiled. How could she not? The sweet, sincere words, the love and affection that she could practically feel just by reading them. It was all she could ever ask for from the one she loved. The way he'd explained the magic warning function made her chuckle. She could picture Harry excitedly talking about it and how he'd made her this gift. Tonks put the bracelet on with a warm smile and looked it over happily. I'm going to have to spoil you on your birthday for this, Harry. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end and Tonks did have to go to work today. Another day of Mad Eye's training followed by patrolling Nocturne Alley again. What she wouldn't give for a nice peaceful patrol of Diagon or Diurne. But her instructor always insisted that those two peaceful alleys weren't real enough. With a shake of her head she stood up. With care she placed her flowers in a glass vase and filled it with some water. Smiling at the bright flowers one more time, Tonks left her room and headed out. Once she left her parents' house, she stepped outside of the simple warded area around the house and with a turn apparated to the ministry. Tonks reappeared in the ministry apparition point and checked herself over. Her Auror robes were proper and freshly cleaned, her badge displayed over her left breast. Giving herself a little nod she made her way to the lifts. Finding a mostly empty one she rode it to level 2 and then headed for the DMLE offices. She nodded to a few of her coworkers as she headed for Mad Eye's office. The senior Auror would always be waiting for her there in the mornings. You're late, Tonks, Alastor admonished the metamorph as she entered his office. I'm 5 minutes early, Mad Eye, Tonks retorted as she rolled her eyes. That means you're 5 minutes late, Alastor grunted as he stood up from his desk. We're not having this argument again, Mad Eye, we're just not. Tonks waved off her instructor's ideas of what was punctual versus what she thought was punctual. Kids these days, Alastor muttered as he hobbled on his fake leg and motioned for her to follow. They left his office and headed for the practice range that was built into the DMLE offices. Every morning they came here for Alastor to instruct her, and every morning Tonks fought for her continued health. The grizzled old Auror didn't know the meaning of take it easy, and every session of training was practically a no-holds-barred duel. He instructed her in mundane stuff, like parchment work, booking, record-keeping and the like, only after their daily patrol. At least I'm not a desk worker, Tonks mused internally as she and Alastor arrived at the practice range. As always, Alastor didn't tell her when practice had begun. She'd found out the old man didn't believe in starting training. In his words, you think some dark witch or wizard is going to tell you when they're going to curse you? And Tonks couldn't really fault him for his thoughts. Alastor's first spell splashed against the wandless protogo she'd conjured. And at least you've learned this much, Alastor growled before he slammed the walking stick he used onto the ground. The shockwave that emitted from it broke her protogo and she had to bat his follow-up spell, from his wand this time, to the side. Her wandless magic made her probably the best choice for protege that Alastor Moody could have found, considering he was currently the only Auror in the entire DMLE that could use dual foci in tandem. Not even Madame Bones could pull that off. I like to think I've learned plenty, Tonks shot back as her hands were in motion. Bright sparks of violet formed above Alastor and rained down on the old man. With a grunt he raised his walking stick and a bright glow emanated from it. A dome of off-white light covered the man and deflected the purple sparks of her unfeeling hex. That was a useful bit of magic she'd learned from Alastor during her time as his protege. It removed the sensation of touch from those hit by it. She'd never really understood just how much she relied on her sense of touch, until she'd suddenly lost it during one of their early training matches. While Alastor shielded with his walking stick, his wand was in motion. Tonks expected this though, and with a pushing motion from each of her hands, shoved the stunners to either side of her. The red lights moved around the obstruction that she'd made with her mana. The floor and walls behind her were peppered with soot marks from the spells. With a grin she took off in a jog around Alastor. He'd made sure to teach her to use every advantage available to her. He was missing a leg and relied on a prosthetic to walk. She better damn well be making full use of her mobility to flank him. As she ran she conjured water. With an application of her mana, the water lost all heat and froze instantly. She launched her 6 30-centimeter-long icicles at her instructor as she continued to move around him. Is that the best you can do, Junior Auror? Alastor yelled at her as his walking stick let out a sound similar to a large bell being rung. The icicles shattered into powder long before they got to him. I've taught you better. With a flick of his wand a long green light lashed out at her almost like a whip. Tonks had never stopped moving, and even still the whip-like spell nearly lashed her. She watched as a few strands of her hair fell to the ground. "Damn it, Mad Eye!" Tonks growled at him. The spell lashed at her again and again as she ducked, dodged, and ran. Then Alastor finished a second spell he'd been casting with his walking stick. The grizzled man slammed the stick into the floor, and the tiles that made up the practice range began to flip like they were on an axle. The effect spread from around Alastor in a circular wave, and Tonks grimaced as she had to split her focus to avoid the whip-like spell, and had to watch her footing to avoid being tripped up by the animated tiles. With a grimace she pulled her own wand and countered the animation charm on the floor tiles. With her split focus she only managed to deflect the whip instead of dispelling it like she wanted to. Constant vigilance. Alastor barked at his protege as he yanked up a few tiles from the floor and transfigured them into wolves. The small pack quickly went after the still-running Tonks. The metamorph hissed at the pressure, still having to avoid the whip-like spell while the pack closed in on her. With a few loops of her wand, the tiles between her and the transfigured wolves became quicksand. The transfigured beasts quickly became trapped, and Tonks had just enough time to dispel the green whip spell before shifting her focus back to the trapped wolves. "I'll show you vigilance," Tonks muttered as she used her wand to quickly undo the transfigurations, leaving a few stone tiles sitting on the floor. Before she shielded against a barrage of spells from both of Alastor's folksy. If it wasn't for his magical eye and its ability to see through obstructions, she'd have already used a smokescreen or even the similitudo to distract him with a copy. While maintaining her shield, she conjured a few fireballs wandlessly. The orbs of flame rocketed outwards from behind her shield, and came at Alastor from multiple directions. The old man had to use one of his folky, the walking stick, to cast another dome shield over himself. With the loss of half of his offense, Tonks had enough focus to take the tiles lying on the floor and banish them at Alastor. "Now you're thinking?" Alastor gave his form of encouragement as he stopped his assault to conjure a shield that would block physical objects, since his dome shield only blocked magical attacks. The tiles smashed into the new shield, and Alastor flicked his wand to vanish the dust. Tonks smirked as she already had her hands up and framing Alastor between her fingers. "Cube!" Tonks cast her own unique self-created spell. The 6 square inverted shields formed around her instructor and locked him inside. Nothing could get out through physical means, and she'd seen how only incredibly focused spells could break it when Harry had used highly pressurized water to cut through it last summer. "Well, at least you're getting better at multitasking," Alastor chuckled. Tonks knew he was buying time to cast a spell that could potentially get him out, so she responded to split his focus. "Yeah, you know what the best part about my cube spell is?" Tonks grinned as she used her wandless magic to hold the cube, while she moved her wand into a complex weave of movements. "Nothing gets out, but things can get in." She jabbed her wand forward, and the tiles on the floor liquefied before rushing forward in a torrent of what looked like cement. The liquid stone quickly began to fill up the cube as Alastor swung his wand to vanish it as fast as possible. "Not bad, lass, not bad at all." Alastor praised his protege before the top of his walking stick glowed brightly. With a bang, her cube spell was dispelled and her liquid stone splattered across the floor. "But I've dealt with weirder combinations." He jabbed his wand forward and a conflagration leapt forward towards the young woman. Tonks wasn't impressed by the incoming flames though. A simple flame-freezing charm, and she might as well have been basking in a warm summer breeze. She retaliated with a series of severing curses, and Alastor only laughed as he knocked them away with his wand. "Look out below," Tonks retorted as she slammed her heel into the floor. Alastor felt the floor tremble with his good leg and only had a second to react. Stone pillars erupted from the floor and the senior Auror launched himself backwards with a spell from his wand to avoid them. Regaining his footing, the old man grinned. His protege was definitely improving. He hadn't had a challenge like this since the war. He jabbed each of the stone pillars with the top of his walking stick. A second after they were touched, they all detached from the floor and went rocketing towards Tonks. "Catch or dodge?" Alastor questioned her, and Tonks chose a third option. The stone pillars morphed under the motions of her wand. The transfigured rocks flowed around the metamorph without coming close to touching her. With a grin, she sent her creation forward. A large, snake-like stone golem gave a roar that sounded like stones grinding against each other as it slithered towards Alastor. While her golem rushed the senior Auror directly, Tonks took off again in a jog to flank him. "Then she should probably dodge." Tonks threw back at her instructor with a grin as her golem bore down on him. With a twist of her wand, she transfigured thick iron chains by the dozens and sent them forward like a torrent of writhing snakes. "Immobulus!" Alastor yelled as he pointed his wand at the golem. The large stone snake stopped moving. With a motion of his walking stick, he cast a second spell. "Depulso!" The immobilized golem was sent careening towards the incoming wave of chains. The rock snake threw up a huge cloud of dirt and dust as it crashed into the floor and destroyed the transfigured chains. Through the dust and debris in the air, Alastor's magical eyes spotted Tonks on the move. The young woman was launching balls of water into the air. The spheres burst and simulated rain as they soaked the practice range. Alastor took aim and sent a series of stunners at his protege. The first two missed as Tonks kept on the move. The third and fourth struck, but bounced off a protego that had been near invisible until the spells hit it. "Chill already, Mad Eye!" Tonks yelled as she stomped on the ground, casting a spell through her foot on the water covering everything. The soaked practice range was quickly covered in ice. All the water froze in a wave extending outwards from Tonks' position. Even Alastor's soaked robes were frozen over, and the senior Auror stilled as his clothes stiffened up. "Not bad there, Lalas." Alastor's teeth chattered at the biting cold he was now covered in. "You're progressing well." He was back to normal in short order as he cast an overpowered warming charm on himself, followed by a drying charm on his clothes. "Thank you." Tonks smiled, pleased with herself and her progress. "Senior Auror Moody!" a loud voice yelled, and the instructor and protege turned to the source. There stood a man both were familiar with, Head Auror Rufus Scrimgeour. "But what have we told you time and time again, I might add, about destroying the practice range? I'm training my protege, you ladder climber." Alastor waved the head Auror off. "Tessin, we have people to fix this place anyway. It's their whole job here at the ministry, if you recall." "Who do you think keeps sending in the complaints about you two destroying the range?" Scrimgeour demanded, as Alastor and Tonks walked towards the exit that Scrimgeour was standing next to. "Tell them to stop whining and do their job," Alastor growled at the younger man, though not by that many years. "We're going on patrol." On Alastor!" Scrimgeour yelled at the pair's backs. "Alastor!" He was summarily ignored. "He's retiring soon. He's retiring. Just a few more months." He exhaled heavily as he took in the destroyed and ice-covered practice range. He was going to be getting complaints about this, and hearing from Madame Bones when she got the complaints too. "Damn it. Box Baton's dueling club. Are you sure, Miss Delacour?" The defense professor questioned the Vilatine. "Yes, they all wish to duel me," Fleur nodded to her professor. "I find duels against multiple opponents more challenging. If Miss Delacour feels she is capable, then she may do so." Headmistress Maxime nodded to the defense professor. The two of them were the ones that watched over the dueling club meetings that took place 4 times a week. "We've seen her duel 3-on-1 before. I'm sure she wouldn't accept a 4-on-1 without feeling up to it." "Thank you, headmistress." Fleur nodded to the large woman. "Very well," the defense professor acquiesced. "Delacour versus Durand, Vincent, André, and Bonnet, take your positions." The 5 students stood a meter apart, 4 on one side, while Fleur stood on the other. "Bow," the defense professor instructed, and all 5 students gave proper bows. "So may begin." In a blink, the 4 students facing Fleur had separated and begun to cast. Fleur wasn't idle and had already moved backwards a bit to prevent Bonnet from flanking her. "Stupefy!" André called out as the bright red light left his wand and headed towards Fleur. "Incarcerus," Durand cast from off to her left. "Impedimenta," Bonnet called from her far right. Fleur flicked her wand and a dome of blue light covered her form. The 3 spells vanished as they failed to overpower the shield. Without slowing down, she cast again. Lata de Pulso Maxima. Fleur cast, using her in-depth knowledge of magic to use rare modifiers that most students never learned. A large wave of force left her wand and sent her 4 opponents stumbling back. "A Bublio," Vincent cast, hoping to trap the Vila. Fleur would have none of it. "Finite." She wiped the charm away as she moved. "Fumos Tria Maxima." From the tip of Fleur's wand, an immense amount of smoke billowed forth. The rushing cloud of smoke quickly filled the dueling area and blinded all of the duelists. Capitalizing on her cover, Fleur conjured her Vila fire. The orange flames danced in her palm as normal, and Fleur smiled. Letting her fire expand, she felt it linger in the thick smoke. This was something she only knew from her studies and chats with Madame Avalon, known as magical relativism to magical scholars, the phenomenon of 2 different magics sharing a natural connection. It was advanced knowledge. The phenomenon related to elemental magics more than most others. In Fleur's case, she was melding smoke and fire, 2 intrinsically linked things, to create new effects. In this instance, she was blending them together to create embers and ash. The smoke around her began to change under her magic. When she felt the change happen, Fleur grinned. A bit of her natural fire magic and some transfiguration with her wand saw her masterfully controlling the newly created ashes and embers. Just in time too, as she heard multiple casts of Evanesco, the vanishing charm, to clear away the thick smoke. What in the world? Bonnet gasped as she looked at Fleur. What kind of spell? Andre stared dumbfounded at the beautiful teen. How? Durand looked confused and shocked by Fleur's magic. Fleur was surrounded by ash and embers, almost like a cloak. But what was really stunning everyone that saw her was the two large black angel-like wings of smoldering ash on her back. They glowed with internal heat and even looked like feathered wings. Such complex magic, cast so quickly, even by a student as advanced as Fleur, was unheard of in their school. Fleur smiled at her opponents, her defense professor, and headmistress Maxime as they all gazed upon her spellcraft. Avis Opungo. Vincent conjured a small flock of birds, and then cast a charm to cause the animals to attack Fleur. The birds flew towards Fleur in a wave, intent on causing her harm, and the platinum-haired teen waved her hand towards the incoming birds. Several dozen of her ash feathers were launched forward and destroyed the conjured birds. With a flap of her black wings, a gale of burning cinders flew towards her opponents. All four raised protego shields to block the widespread attack. Fleur kept her wand in her right hand as she subtly moved it to animate her wings. Her left hand conjured flames and launched them at her four adversaries. Aguamenti! All four teens launched jets of water at the burning villa. Fleur brought her right wing forward to block the jets of water. Steam erupted from the doused wing, and Fleur easily separated the soaked feathers from her right wing. A quick flick of her wand had the wet ash formed into pellets the size of golf balls. A swipe and the pellets were fired forward like buckshot. Andre and Durand managed to shield, but Bonnet and Vincent let out cries as they were struck. Before they even dropped their shields, both Durand and Andre stared in slowly growing panic as Fleur's right ash wing heated up, bright glowing embers emerging from within, and then reformed all the lost feathers from before. Plumes de braise, Fleur intoned, and her animated wings flapped forward. A storm of her black ash feathers, burning with embers, filled her four opponents' vision. They raised shields to block only to find the feathers fluttering around their protego charms and landing on them. The feathers smoldered against their robes, smoke rising from where they touched. With a cry of pain, Vincent swatted a feather off his head. More and more of the burning plumage rained down on the duelists as they tried to repeatedly change the angles of their shield charms. No matter where they placed their shields, the feathers would flutter towards them from a different direction. While they were too distracted by her feathers, Fleur cast the spell that would win her the duel. Solata Expelliarmus Trio Maxima. A wave of force violently yanked the wands away from each of the four duelists, sending them stumbling and falling to the floor as their hands and arms were almost dragged along by the heavily modified disarming hex. Stop, the defense professor called out. Durand, Bonnet, Andre, and Vincent have been disarmed. Delacour wins. The protective ward that separated the dueling area from the rest of the large room dropped, and Fleur was quick to wave her wand and vanish her spell and all of its remnants. She kept her head held high and didn't let anyone see the fact that her breathing was heavy. That spell was a drain on her mana like nothing else. Prolonged use was still a ways away. At best, she could currently use it for maybe 5 minutes, 6 if she pushed it. On top of that were the heavily modified Expelliarmus she used to win, and the modified Fumos that she needed to use to create her spell in the first place. She estimated that this duel probably cost her at least 3,000 lum of her mana. Oh, that was most impressive, Miss Delacour. Headmistress Maxime congratulated her student. Thank you, Headmistress. Fleur bowed to the incredibly tall woman. I've never seen such a spell in all my days. Maxime continued with a curious expression. Wherever did you learn it? Sandine did not learn it anywhere, Headmistress. Fleur shook her head, her platinum blonde locks following her movement. I created that spell from my knowledge of magical theory and a lot of practice. You created that spell? Maxime looked stunned at the Vila teen. Such complex spellcraft, and you're so young. The headmistress was seemingly having a hard time wrapping her mind around such an accomplishment. And I call it manteau de cendre. Fleur spoke up with a smile. Unlike a little artistry in my spells, I know it may be considered somewhat vain, but I wanted my spell to really show the pride I hold in my heritage. It's a fine name, Miss Delacour, Maxime assured the teen. I was merely shocked at how far you've come in your time here at Boxbaddens. You do the school proud, and I'm sure you'll become a very famous witch like many others that have learned in these hallowed halls. Thank you very much, Headmistress, I'm honored. Fleur gave a bright smile to the woman. When we are proud to have you as a student here, Miss Delacour. Maxime smiled back at her student, and the two parted ways to resume the dueling club. Current mana levels: Harry, 6,352 Tonks, 7,988 Penelope, 6,876 Fleur, 244. Chapter 29. The Welsh Dragon Reserve. Harry sat alone in his compartment on the Hogwarts Express. He was headed back to Woodend Cottage for the Easter break. He'd mirror called Sirius and explained what he wanted to accomplish over the short break. His godfather had thought the day trip together would be fun and had readily agreed to take Harry. The Dragon Reserve in Wales was home to nearly the entire population of common Welsh green dragons in the world. When the large beasts got too old, or the population in the reserve too high, they were farmed for the materials they could make, be it scales, hide, bones, blood, horns, etc. Harry was very much looking forward to the trip. To pass the time on the trip, Harry was reading an advanced book on arithmancy and spellcraft. He made notes in a separate journal from all of his others as he read. Looking deeper into spellcraft was interesting to say the least. He'd seen how Penny and Tonks both crafted their own spells. Fleur had written to him about her own spellcraft, and Harry was very interested to see her Manteau de Cendra whenever they had the chance to meet up again, hopefully soon after school let out for the summer. Interesting, Harry mumbled as he read over the tome, and took notes on the creation of shield charms. Tonks' cube spell made 6 inverted shield charms that became a cube when cast. It was a wonderful spell for capture and detainment, very fitting for an auror. Looking into various types of shield charms, Harry was wondering the limits of said protective magic. There were shields for physical objects, shields for spells and magical effects, and advanced shields that could do both. Harry noted that there were no shields that could be cast and then left for any length of time. He supposed that made some sense though. The charms were sustained by the caster, without them they faded away. Long-term protections without constant maintenance fell under the branch of magic that was warding. As he read and made notes, an idea began to form in the Artificer's mind. Taking detailed notes on the formation of shield spells, and the complexity of shields that could block both physical and magical attacks. Harry nodded as he wrote. He stopped writing for a moment to open his magical bag and look through it for a specific book he'd brought along. Finding Advanced Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling 2. Harry pulled it out before flipping to a marked page. The chapter in question was size in relation to magic, and Harry quickly pulled the Advanced Arithmancy tome close again. It was also open to a marked page, though in this case it was about a specific type of spellcraft, construct magic. This is going to take some time. Harry grinned to himself in amusement. Really, what project or idea of his didn't take time? But getting his idea noted down should kill most of the train ride back to London. When the Hogwarts Express pulled into platform 9 3/4 in the late afternoon, bordering on early evening hours, Harry stepped off the train with his magical bag slung over his shoulder, and a pleased smile on his face. Though he was pleased with getting his spell idea written out, he was a bit less pleased about the fact that the current notes and formulae took up a full 32 pages by themselves. "Harry!" Sirius exclaimed as he saw his godson. "Sirius!" Harry chuckled as he was pulled into a hug from his godfather. "How have you been? You haven't been working too hard, I hope?" Sirius chuckled as they walked towards the flue. "About normal articulated metal is still difficult, but I'm progressing." Harry shrugged as they found an empty flue fireplace and grabbed some flue powder. In a flash of green flames, the duo arrived to Woodend Cottage. Taylor was overjoyed to see Harry again, and informed both of them that dinner would be ready in the next hour. Harry and Sirius spent time chatting and catching up in person, rather than through mirror calls. "So, any progress on your many projects?" Sirius questioned with a grin. Harry always had something going on, and Sirius was amazed that the teen could keep so many things going at the same time. "Yes, the spell ward guards are basically done, though until I can make actual gauntlets they're still prototypes," Harry informed him. "The Mana Bane chain works now, but it could definitely use more fine-tuning. The motions of the control sequence are still rough and simple. I'm hopeful to finally have a breakthrough with my own flying item after our trip tomorrow. I really believe that what's stalling me is that none of the materials that I've been using has any connection to flight. I thought about using feathers of some kind, but magical birds aren't exactly common around Hogwarts. Not to mention that feathers aren't really suited to being placed into a hot forge." "Always the busy bee, aren't you, Harry?" Sirius chortled at him. "Are the mirrors still stumping you too?" he asked with a teasing grin. "I'll figure them out eventually," Harry groused as he thought about his long-term project. He was still trying to figure out the only successful pair of communication mirrors that the Marauders had ever made. He'd gone over Lupin's notes time and time again, but still had nothing to show for it. The enchanting was all technically correct, the charms chosen functioned together properly, and the mirrors were just standard. Non-magical glass. Harry had run his mind over this problem on dozens upon dozens of occasions already. Take your time, Harry. It's not like it's necessary for you to figure it out. Sirius chuckled at the annoyed look on his godson's face. And I will figure it out though. I'll make sure of it. Harry grumbled as he thought about the mystery for a bit longer. Whenever it happens, it happens. Sirius shrugged nonchalantly. And the head of the Dragon Reserve was surprised that you wanted to buy directly. Seems they're not used to selling parts except to wholesalers. But you being who you are, and me being who I am, he agreed without any problem. Chalk one up for fame and heredity, I guess. Harry chuckled while Sirius cracked a smile. Men Master Sirius, young Master Harry, dinner is being ready now, Taylor announced with a smile. The wizards headed into the kitchen after the happy house elf to have a wonderful dinner. They spent the rest of the evening talking, and Harry showed Sirius some of his notes, most of which Sirius couldn't make heads or tails of, as well as his wandless progress with the Patronus charm. It was still just silver mist without his wand, but Sirius assured him that it was impressive. The two went to bed that night excited for their trip tomorrow. The next day, Wales Dragon Reserve, not what I was expecting, but also very much what I was expecting, Harry mentioned as he and Sirius stood in front of the massive walls that made up the reserve. The walls felt magical and the air had noticeable small ripples, almost like a heat haze, over the entire walled-in area. Harry believed them to be powerful wards necessary to keep the giant fire-breathing beasts from simply flying away. Yeah, this seems about right for dragons. Sirius nodded in agreement. On Lord Black, Artificer Potter. Good to meet you both. A large, rough-looking wizard greeted them as he walked through a small door next to the larger gates. Harry estimated the man to be in his late 50s or early 60s, though like most magicals he didn't look it. His dark brown hair lacked any trace of gray yet. His face was likewise free of wrinkles. Harry did notice a few scars on the man, but he worked with dragons, so that was probably to be expected. With a tiny bit of mana into his glasses, Harry scanned the man's mana level. That isn't bad at all, Harry thought to himself as he noted the reading his scouter had picked up. Rhys Hughes, head of Dregward Reserve. Rhys offered his hand, and Sirius shook it firmly. Not used to buyers coming up into the mountains to collect their own merchandise. He laughed heartily. And we usually have to fly it down ourselves. Harry needs specific bones this time, so he felt it best to come to the professionals directly. Sirius informed Rhys with a chuckle of his own. Is that right? Rhys looked at the teen artificer curiously. Any particular reason? My 10th item I wish to create is meant to achieve flight. Unfortunately, I've been stymied in my attempts up to now. I believe it's because I lack materials that have a connection to the act of flight itself. Dragons are often far too heavy to lift themselves with their wings alone from my research. I believe that some of their innate magic is what helps them to fly. That is why I wanted to make sure I collected wing bones specifically. Harry informed the head of the reserve honestly. It made no difference to him if the man knew one of his projects. It wasn't like Harry was planning to sell them once he'd successfully made them. These would be another item that Harry would keep to himself. Well, I don't really know anything about enchanting. Most buyers are more interested in the dragon's blood, organs, and bones for potions and the like. Rhys shrugged before a grin was directed at Harry. But you're right about their wings. The great beasts wouldn't be able to get off the ground just by flapping. Some bit of their magic does indeed help them to fly. But it's probably not the same bit that lets them breathe fire. The man chuckled as he motioned for the two of them to follow him. The trio entered through the door next to the gate. After passing a set of burly wizards, security for the reserve apparently, they went through another set of doors and Harry blinked at the smell. It was less than pleasant to say the least. Rhys chuckled at the looks on Sirius and Harry's faces. They saw what was causing the smell easily enough though. A large dragon, dead and with its hide removed, was being rendered down in a large open space by roughly a dozen people. Barrels of blood were being drained from the large beast. Its wings had been removed at the joints on its back, the horns had been removed and its underbelly was opened as organs were being removed and harvested. Well, that's quite a sight, Sirius commented and Rhys snorted a laugh. Don't you get used to it? Rhys shrugged as he watched his staff work. Ol' Hillera there was always a handful. Used to bully the smaller dragons he did. These last few years his age started catching up with him though. He'll produce a lot of good material at least. So notice the wings have been removed, Harry mentioned, still not used to the smell as his face scrunched up a bit. Aye, when Lord Black gave us a flu call about what you wanted, I had Arwell, one of my senior staff, work on the wings exclusively so they'd be ready. Rhys motioned for them to follow him again. They went through a large door, similar to a garage door in the non-magical world, and saw what they'd come for. Harry marveled at the clean bones the older man, much older looking than Reese, was working on. "Arwell, looks like you're about done," Reese called out, and the older wizard looked up from his work. Yes, just going over the bones to make sure they're clean." Arwell waved his boss off. "Membrane, tendons, ligaments and meat has been sorted and sent to the processors already. All that's left are these bones now." The older man motioned to the large collection of wing bones laid out on a raised platform. Harry got a rough count of 26 bones, all large because of the size of the dragon they came from. The amount of material here would surely be enough for him to get his prototype working, he hoped. "How much?" Harry questioned, and Reese looked between the teen and Sirius for a moment. "Harry, I'll pay for them," Sirius stated, but Harry shook his head. "So I appreciate the offer, Sirius, but these are for my own enchanting. This isn't to make an item to sell later once I succeed. You'll see no return on investment, so I'd rather pay for them myself," Harry explained, and Sirius looked proudly at him. But Harry could still see the desire to pay for the bones in his godfather's eyes. The man was nothing if not a doting godparent. "All right, I get it." Sirius held up his hands with a grin. Harry chuckled while shaking his head. Sirius would always be serious. "So, how much for them?" Harry asked again. 1,991 galleons, 8 sickles, and 14 knuts total," Reese stated, and Harry blinked at the total. That was a bit more than he expected. "So I don't suppose we could haggle?" Harry asked with a chuckle. "Afraid not, Artificer Potter." Reese shook his head with a grin. "Good thing I brought the mokeskin today." Harry sighed as he pulled out the pouch. Harry cast a spell with just his voice as he whispered into the pouch. A slightly complex version of the standard summoning charm that was simply more specific about what it summoned. "Into the trunk over here if you would, Artificer Potter." Reese motioned to a trunk, smaller than the ones that Hogwarts students used, sitting on a table behind Arwell. "Of course." Harry nodded as he stepped over to the open trunk and pointed his mokeskin pouch at it. From the pouch, a deluge of golden coins poured forth. Harry watched as the coins seemingly always had space to fit inside the trunk. A few moments later, the pouch spat out the 8 silver sickles, followed by the 14 bronze knuts, into the trunk, and Harry put his mokeskin pouch away. "This should only take a minute." Reese smiled as he closed the lid of the trunk and then tapped it with his wand. The trunk seemed to vibrate a bit, making a sort of buzzing sound while doing so, and Harry noticed a series of numbers on what would be the latch of a normal trunk. 3 letters stood out on the latch: G, Sace, and K. Next to each letter, a number appeared on the metal, changing rapidly next to the G. The K stopped at 14, followed by the S at 8. After right about a minute, the G stopped on 1,991. "Everything checks out then." Reese nodded as he checked the latch. "Arwell, wrap up Artificer Potter's purchase, please." Arwell nodded as he tapped the platform with his wand 3 times. Harry watched, delighted at the show of magic, as thick parchment appeared under the wing bones and folded itself over them. The artificer had to fight outright laughter as he watched the huge parchment fold itself into the shape of an envelope and then shrink down to until it would have easily been indistinguishable from a regular letter. Arwell summoned the envelope to himself before passing it to Harry. With an amused grin from the show, Harry fished out 2 galleons from his robe pocket and handed them to the older man. "For your time, your skill, and the show." Harry chuckled, and Arwell chortled as he pocketed the coins. "That spell only works once, young man," Arwell informed Harry. "Once you open the envelope, it'll return to full size along with the bones inside. You won't be able to shrink it again like that." "Such, how do you do that?" Harry asked curiously. "That would be a very helpful bit of magic to know how to do." "I'm afraid that's a trade secret, Artificer Potter." Arwell shook his head with a chuckle. "Ready to go now, Harry?" Sirius grinned at his godson. "All right. Keep your secrets then." Harry waved Arwell off with a smile of his own. "Let's go, Sirius. I think I can get a bit of work done while on my break." "Not if I invite Nim over," Sirius teased as they followed behind Reese, back the way they'd come. "I'm going to tell her you said the name." Harry smirked at his godfather. "I'll use you as a shield," Sirius fired back. "I'll hex you if you try," Harry retorted, a smile on his face as he and Sirius bantered back and forth. "Come again if you ever need more fresh dragon bones." Reese laughed as he showed them out of the door of the reserve. These two were a regular comedy act. "Sure thing." Harry nodded to the man. Sirius took hold of Harry's arm and sidelong apparated them back to Woodend Cottage, Albania. Stephen Flint trembled in fear as he watched the 7 wizards he'd ambushed over the last week burn. Each of the men had been drained of their blood. That blood was then used to draw a strange circle around their corpses. Stephen was no scholar. He couldn't even begin to identify what type of magic his master was using. All the terrified man knew was that it was dark magic. The flames roared and crackled, empowered by the red glow coming from the blood circle. Soon, Voldemort hissed as he watched the flames quickly reduce the wizards to ash. He glanced at the potions he'd brewed for this night. Under the full moon, his homunculus body would be completed. April 25, 1994 would be the date of his triumphant return to a body capable of wielding magic. Maybe I'll make it a holiday when I rule the world? The Dark Lord mused to himself as he watched the flames rise higher. The potions had been difficult to brew, stuck as he was in a squib's body. Mostly useless except as sacrifices, they couldn't even brew potions by themselves. He'd had to expend his own weakened magic to make sure that the potions brewed properly. Once the empowered flames had died down, Voldemort stood up in his current host's body. Looking into the blackened pit, he saw the shape of a human buried in the soot and ashes. Barely able to sense anything in the squib's body, he reached out with his host's hand and placed it on the form. There, he felt it. Magic existed in this body. It was breathing very shallowly. It was a living homunculus, but empty and devoid of purpose or mind. Just what he'd planned. He spared no thought to the fact that his host's flesh was being lightly burned as he knelt in the still hot ashes of the fire. He'd be leaving it momentarily anyway. Stephen nearly screamed in terror when he saw his master's body convulse and shake as if having a fit of some kind. A horrible shrieking wail emerged from the squib's mouth as a black smoke-like vapor was expelled. The vapor swirled in the air for a moment before covering the body buried in soot and ash. The squib dropped backwards and didn't move. Stephen already knew he was dead. He'd seen what was left of his master's hosts after he left them for a new one before. The black mist seeped into the newly created body in the pit. The homunculus gave a jolt before going still again. "My lord?" Stephen stuttered out as he slowly approached the body. He looked over the still buried form and wondered if something had gone wrong. He screamed, half in shock and half in horror, when two dark red eyes snapped open in the soot. They gave a dim glow for a brief moment before the homunculus slowly sat up. Stephen was reminded of the last time he'd seen his great-grandfather before the man had passed. Feeble, weak, and barely able to get out of bed by himself. Voldemort was much the same at this moment. His new body was weak and unused, practically a newborn, if newborns were 180 centimeters tall. "Get out of my way, fool," Voldemort hissed out at the terrified man as he took unsteady steps towards his potions. Just walking was taking a toll on him right now. But his potions would soon fix that. He just needed to get to them. When he reached the bottles, he had to stop for breath. This was why he had never wanted to grow old, to become weak and feeble, to become vulnerable. He steadied his hands before picking up the first potion in the set he'd brewed. Strengthening solution would make this body stronger, able to bear the physical toll he'd need to return to his rightful place atop the magical world. Feeling the solution slowly taking effect, Voldemort reached for the next potion. Blood replenishing potion would increase the bare minimum of blood his current body had. Homunculi were usually made for a specific purpose that they'd fulfill for years or decades. But they all started off weak and with barely functioning bodies. With blood being produced in proper amounts, he'd recover faster. The next potion he picked up was the everlasting elixir. Downing it, he breathed deeply and let it have time to do its work. With the elixir, his homunculus body wouldn't break down, a very real concern when making homunculi. Most anyone that made one would have said elixir on hand to stabilize and fortify their creation. Feeling more strength in his body, along with his breathing becoming easier, Voldemort smirked viciously. Now it was time to truly bring out all the benefits of this new unaging body. Voldemort chuckled darkly as he downed the potion of all potential. This had been the hardest potion to brew. It had cost him so much of his weakened magic that he'd almost feared he'd lose possession of his host and be expelled, disappearing into vapor forever. But he'd succeeded. This potion would unlock the full potential of anyone that drank it. It was known to increase physical strength, improve all bodily functions, and even increase intelligence and magical power. It was almost impossible to brew successfully, but he'd studied under Horace Slughorn. The old professor might be a corpulent suck-up, always trying to expand his connections, but he was a true master of the craft. He'd give the old man a quick and painless death for his contributions to Voldemort's conquest. "Flint!" Voldemort snapped at his only servant. The man stumbled forth and bowed, groveled really, at his feet. "Yes, my lord." Stephen dared not even look up from where his head was planted into the dirt. "Bring me a robe now." Voldemort let out a hiss, and Stephen jerked upright as he tried to rush to his feet as fast as possible. With an exhale, Voldemort held himself upright. His new body was stable but weak, severely so. He would not show an ounce of weakness in front of his servant though, lest the man get any ideas. As he waited, he took stock of his form. He had no hair, but he wasn't a vain man concerned with his looks. His face should be similar to what it had been before that accursed night. He was about the same height as he had been as well. Looking down, he noticed his body was lean, much like it had been before, but also looking as if he'd been starved for a long while. He noted with some dark amusement that his genitals were the same as he remembered. Not that they functioned for their sexual purpose anymore. That was an ironclad rule of homunculi. They couldn't procreate. They had no ability to conceive or breed in any fashion. Beings made from magic couldn't bring life into the world like natural creatures could. They were sterile, barren, impotent, and had no sexual drive whatsoever. Bah, not like he'd ever had such wants or desires. He would be immortal. What use did he have of consorts, concubines, or heirs? They would all wither away and die, while he stayed alive and ruled the world. No, Lord Voldemort had no need for the base instinct of procreation. Just another pointless thing he'd gladly toss to the winds in his pursuit of power and domination. "Your robe, my lord," Stephen uttered out, as he held out a black robe to his master. Voldemort held out his arms, giving an unspoken order to place the garment on him to his shivering servant. Once he was robed, Voldemort walked freely to the small stone cottage they'd been hiding out in. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so weak. It had been decades since he'd felt so exhausted and low on magic. He needed food and rest to recover. With time, his magic would recover as well. Speaking of which, he'd need to get a wand once he was a bit stronger. His original yew and phoenix feather wand from Ollivander's was either locked away, deep inside the ministry, or had been snapped and burned by one of his many enemies within the ministry after his fall. No matter, a wand could be replaced. There were dozens of wand makers in Europe after all, hundreds throughout the world. But no, he dare not leave Europe. He knew of some of the magicals that lived in other parts of the world. Until he was back to full strength, he couldn't risk gaining attention like that. He wasn't the only dark wizard in the world. No need to risk anything until he could operate on the same level again. "Flint, get me food and drink, I need to eat," Voldemort hissed at the man. "Yes, my lord." Stephen bolted out of the small cottage and quickly disappeared with a crack of apparition. "Just a while longer. I will never die." "You'll not vanquish me, Harry Potter!" Voldemort raged silently within his own mind. Prophecy or not, he'd never die. No one would be allowed to stand in his way. His rule was inevitable. It was his destiny to be the greatest wizard that ever lived. That was the only fate he believed in. Current mana levels: Harry, Tonks, Penelope, Fleur. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I will continue with one part a day for this story as well.